across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive with me, Peter Cardwell, in for Jeremy Kyle all this week. Loads to discuss, including Nigel Farage demanding an apology after a Labour cabinet minister this morning made what Farage thinks is a disgusting claim that he, Farage, is on the side of predators such as Jimmy Savile in the online safety law row. Loads to discuss about that. Also, 2 people are dead and 2 injured at a stabbing in South London. We'll talk a little bit about that. 2, also, police officers are accused of also abusing victims of the Rotherham grooming gangs scandal. We will talk about that in this programme. We'll talk about what Keir Starmer's up to as well. This afternoon he held a cabinet meeting at 2 o'clock about the crisis in Gaza. He's also going to outline some roadmap anyway, to recognising a Palestinian state. Should he do that, or will it just reward Hamas terrorists? Let me know your thoughts on all of those matters. We'll talk to Sarah Pochin as well, the Reform UK MP, about all those comments made by the Technology Secretary. Peter Kyle will play them again to you in a second. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to get your voice on the air between now and 7 o'clock. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note too, keep them to less than a minute if you can. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message and give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 7 o'clock. Let's make your voice part of the conversation. 0344 499 1000. So it's been an extraordinary day of news. I didn't even mention that, believe it or not, it is 1 year on from the Southport attacks, the tragedy there. We will reflect on all of that with one of the strongest guests that I have spoken to, a man who owns an amusement park in Southport. He'd been working with the families, working with the community and helping them heal. It's 1 year on, and that is just an astonishing thing since that horrendous attack. Axel Rudikubana, of course, is in prison, and there he will remain for many years, and rightly so. Today, a war of words really between the Labour Party and Nigel Farage. It's a fascinating and very strange story about the Online Safety Act. It kicked in last week. A lot of people can't access certain things that they want to. Some of them perhaps not to be talked about at 4 on a Tuesday afternoon in the school holidays, but others, things like speeches by MPs, for example. There's a Conservative MP called Katie Lamb. She made a speech about the Rotherham grooming scandal and the rape gangs, and that wasn't allowed to be shown on Twitter, for example, because of the Online Safety Act. So what's going on here? Also, if you're for it, well, Labour says that's great, and if you're against it, you're like Jimmy Savile. That's what they said of Nigel Farage earlier. Let's remind ourselves of the comments that Technology Secretary Peter Cardwell made to Sky News this morning.
We have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'll be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side.
That's an extraordinary thing to say. Well, this afternoon, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, hit back.
Well, this is so absolutely disgusting that it's almost beyond belief. Just how low can a Labour government sink in its desperation? Yes, of course, they're in trouble. They're well behind us in the opinion polls. But frankly, to say that I would do anything that would in any way aid and abet people like Jimmy Savile is frankly just, it's so below the belt, it's almost not true. But all of this is, of course, deflection. Deflection because we were told from the very start, and by the way, it's not the Labour government that have passed this legislation, it was the previous Conservative government that have passed this legislation, which is why you've barely heard a squeak out of them. But if it's designed to protect children, then I sense it may very, very well have been drawn up by people who don't know what they're doing.
Nigel Farage responding to the comments by the Technology Secretary Peter Cardwell on Sky News earlier today. Well, let's speak to the former Labour spokesman James Mathewson, who is with us now. James, what do you make of these comments by Peter Cardwell? They're very strong, incendiary comments. Was it the right way to attack Nigel Farage on this?
What they are, Peter, is stupid comments, aren't they? I mean, let's be honest, they're just stupid things to say. I think in the moment, obviously, Peter Cardwell's come out with this thing off the top of his head. He's not stuck to the very strict briefing he'll have received before that interview, which always happens with with government ministers especially. He'll have received a briefing from the briefing team, and he's just gone and thrown his own comment in there, thinking it'll be clever. Then he's decided, as he's shown on your screen right now, to double down on it by tweeting it out.
Yeah, he's tweeted, and the tweet is on the screen now. If you want to overturn the Online Safety Act, you're on the side of the predators. It is as simple as that. And that is in response to what Nigel Farage has said, which is Peter Cardwell's comments on Sky News are disgusting. He should do the right thing and apologise. I wonder, though, James, I mean, I've been part of some of those briefings when I worked in government for sort of 3.5 years. I've listened to the briefing teams at 10 Downing Street with the civil service and political side under the Conservative administration. And I do wonder, I mean, he said it twice. It wasn't as if it slipped out. He said it twice. And I wonder whether it was deliberate, whether it was him, whether it was deflection, whether it was the Number 10 saying, right, we've got to move the story on from Trump's criticisms of Starmer yesterday, which we'll perhaps talk about in a second. Because Peter Cardwell is generally quite a sensible, level-headed kind of person. But the fact that he is saying this stuff, the fact that he is so incendiary, and what will annoy an awful lot of people is not just the content of it, but the fact that so many on the left will say, well, the right just, reduces things, is very reductive in the argument, says things to get effect, compares people. If you criticise the Rotherham inquiry in any way, you're on the side of the grooming gangs. That's not helpful to the debate. I just wonder, I mean, there is a debate to be had about the Online Safety Act. There's no doubt about that. I just wonder if this was in any way helpful.
I don't think it's helpful at all. And look, if they're wanting to try and combat Nigel Farage, which is what they're wanting to do, then you've just played into his hands. You've given him the right of reply. You've given him the chance to come back and make a statement. And what's Farage done? Done what he does very well, which is make the most out of this opportunity and be able to say, this is deflection because of X, Y, and Z, and being able to get his own argument across. It's given him space. And instead of the government being able to talk about this policy or this, this bill that it's championing, which, as you rightly point out, isn't even their bill originally. It's a Tory bill. And there seems to be a kind of theme with this government is continuing to pass the legislation that, the Tories have worked on previously, kind of relatively unchanged and attach themselves to it and get all the criticism for it. The Tories must be kind of laughing about that, to be honest. But Farage will be the beneficiary of this overall. To say something so ridiculous about somebody, so slanderous, there's only one thing people are going to think when they see it. And look, no matter how much you dislike Nigel Farage, most people are going to go, yeah, well, that's obviously not correct.
It's obvious to the vast majority of people. There'll be very few people who will say, yeah, Peter Cardwell, you got a point there. Yeah, if you oppose this draconian piece of legislation, if you oppose what the government's doing, obviously you're on the side of online predators and Jimmy Savile. I mean, it's such a reductive argument. It's cheap.
Yeah, it's out of touch as well, though, Peter, because I've got mates of mine who, on in the political sphere who don't know what's going on with legislation, who rang me. I had 3 of them ring me the other day going, why can't I get on Reddit? What's going on? I'm trying to get on Reddit. I'm trying to look at my video games guides, or I'm trying to look at whatever I'm looking at online there. And I can't. I've got to put a selfie of myself up. And one of them managed to get around it by taking a selfie from the video game he was playing, of the character he was playing as, and uploading that instead, and it worked. So as for the legislation working to protect children, 15-year-olds will get around that in a heartbeat.
Well, there are loads of 15-year-olds and younger who will know how to get things like VPNs. These you download it apparently. I haven't done it myself, but you download it and it can identify as if you're in anot's country and allow you to do that. Yeah,
I mean, I've got a VPN, so this legislation doesn't even affect me. It's the case for most people now. Most people who use whether it be online gaming software, whether it be things that they want to access, even just watching things like Netflix shows that aren't available in the UK, in the US, they have a VPN to do that. So, it's just not something that's, to make it sound like it's such a binary choice. Like if you're against it in any way, you're a predator or support predators, and to be the righteous person, you have to support it. It's ridiculous.
Well, I just want to remind people, because we're getting calls and texts and all sorts of things coming into the building. If you just missed what we're talking about in the last 10 minutes, it's Peter Cardwell, the Technology Secretary, usually a relatively sort of less crazy person in the Labour front bench, generally fairly straightforward, saying this about Nigel Farage and the Online Safety Act.
We have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'll be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side.
So that is Peter Cardwell speaking to Sky News this morning. If you want to get your thoughts on the air about this anytime between now and 7 o'clock, pick up the phone, make the call 0344 499 1000. James Mathewson, former Labour spokesman, still with me. James, I know you are in Scotland, as was Donald Trump. Perhaps you weren't rushing to give him a great hug and say what a marvellous human being he was, but he was telling Keir Starmer, slash taxes and migration to beat Farage. Is there something in that?
Yeah, I think the only thing me and Donald Trump have in common at the moment is that we're both in Scotland and we both have terrible hair at the moment. So, but I think the only thing I can think of with this, it just makes Keir Starmer look so spineless. Everybody who I've spoken to about this, on the left, on the right, all over the political spectrum, just thought it was a complete embarrassment to see Starmer kind of sat there just taking it on the chin.
Well, we'll come back and talk more about it in a second, but let's have a quick look at what happened yesterday. This was in Scotland, and Keir Starmer having a chat with President Trump.
Politics is pretty simple. It's I assume there's a thing going on between you and Nigel, and it's okay, it's two parties. But generally speaking, the one who cuts taxes the most, the one who gives you the lowest energy prices and the best kind of energy, the one that keeps you out of wars, he's kept you out of wars, but the one that keeps you out of wars, you have a few basics, and you can go back 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, whoever does these things, but low taxes, keep us safe, keep us out of wars, no crime, stop the crime, and in your case, a big immigration component, because I know that your attitude has become strong on immigration, strong on the toughness of immigration. But I think whoever's going to be, I think I won because we had a lousy president, to be honest with you. We had an incompetent president. But I won because I was very strong on immigration.
I mean, Keir Starmer just looks incredibly uncomfortable during that. He just looks as if he wants to be really anywhere else than there, doesn't he?
Can you blame him? I mean, I'm going to criticize Keir Starmer in a minute, Peter. I will. But what a moron Donald Trump is. You go back 1,000,000 years.
He's not a moron, though, if he says that immigration is one of the reasons he won the election, and that's true.
He thinks people existed 1,000,000 years ago, and there was governments 1,000,000 years ago. The man doesn't know what he's talking about. Look, he's right about one thing. He won because of his strong lines on those things. He knows what his supporters want, and he knows what the right wing in America want, right? But unfortunately, we just see him wading in with the confidence that is astounding.
Well, the confidence of a man who's won a US election twice, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's different. He's not in America, And to talk the way he was talking about Sadiq Khan, but I'm going to round on Keir Starmer now, because I'm sorry, if I was sat there and a friend of mine was being insulted by a man who was sitting next to me, saying he's a nasty person, all the rest, I wouldn't just go, well, awkward. He's a friend of mine. You would say no, he's not. You would come back with something. You would try and push back.
It was more than a conversation, though, isn't it? I mean, these are not just two human beings. They're people representing incredibly important offices within the United States, and the UK. There's quite a lot about the North Sea as well, and the trade pact. A great deal for everybody, says Trump. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I mean, again, great to have a deal. Deals are great, aren't they? But it's just this kind of like this toddler wandering around the globe being like, it's the best deal. I tell you who handled them masterfully was Ursula von der Leyen, right? And she was just sat there like, she used three words that I thought were expert that made Donald Trump smile. And it was the word huge 3 times. Mm-hmm. She said the word huge 3 times. And every time she said this is a huge deal, he was glowing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's one of his favourite words, isn't it? Yeah.
She was playing them like a fiddle.
We were talking about conspiracy theories earlier on, just talking about that with Ian Collins. We were talking about, did man land on the moon? Yes. Was JFK shot by Lee Harvey Oswald from the Texas Book Depository? Yes. But one unexplained paranormal phenomena I can't explain away, James, is the fact we've received a text message praising you, and this is from this is from Anne, who says, "What's happened to James Mathewson? He's agreeing with us normal people." We will leave you on that. That's Anne there, who is praising you. So clearly, lots of different things. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. James Mathewson, thank you very much indeed, former Labour spokesman there. Tarquin is in London. Has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Tarquin, first call of Drive today. What would you like to say?
Well, it looks like that James Mathewson has as competition as the most cretinous moron from the left, and with Peter Kyle.
Tell us what you really think.
Yeah, with this new guy slithers from the swamp of Labour's high caliber class of candidate here to tell us what they really. He's this guy Peter Kyle. Never heard of him before.
Well, he's a technology. He's a Secretary of State. He is a pretty senior politician.
No, airhead buffoon. I mean, nobody gives up about that anyway, Peter. Quite honestly, the fact that he slithered out and said this, literally, it's recruiting sergeant territory, reform rubbing their hands with glee, quite rightly so. To actually use the Savile card, it's like using the Hitler argument.
Yeah, it is. You immediately lose the argument. Yeah. You're absolutely right, Tarquin. There's a phenomenon called Godwin's law. Professor Godwin, who was an American professor, he said, as soon as you start comparing people to the Nazis, you've just lost the argument. And I think that applies here too.
Yeah, we have to rename it. We'll call it Peter Kyle's law.
Peter Kyle's law, yeah.
But he's just done all of the recruiting work for reform and those with basic common sense, I think, because it was the most stupidest thing to say. I mean, it's so underhanded. I don't know if Nigel probably even waste his time with consulting his lawyers, but I think he could do. But I think he's got more important things, as in preparing for office, quite honestly, now after that statement, Peter.
I think it's a very fair point, Tarquin. Just before you go, Tarquin, apparently our producer asked you if you'd like to speak to Peter Kyle. Was that correct, mixing up Jeremy Kyle and me?
No, Cardi P is unique. Never mix it up with you, sir. Never.
You're very kind. Tarquin, thank you very much indeed. I disagree with you, though, Tarquin, on James Mathewson. I disagree with James Mathewson on most things, but I don't think he's a cretin. I don't think he's an idiot. I think he's someone who just disagrees with me on a lot of things. Thank you to Margaret in Birmingham, who says, because Reform are leading in the polls, Nigel did say that they would come after him. He was so right. Nigel said sue, but it's more dignity than do that. That's a point that Tarquin was making as well. Think it was planned. Say no more, says Margaret. And quite a number of other people getting in touch about other things as well, including Jenny in Bicester, great shopping village there, who says Hamas is a prescribed organisation under UK law. If Starmer legitimises an organisation run by Hamas, i.e. a Palestinian state in Gaza, will he be breaking the law? I don't think he will, Jenny, necessarily, but it's a reasonable point. It's a very good point, actually. And the question is, where is Palestine? Where would a Palestinian state actually be? Because at the moment, you're talking about two territories that are controlled, one by, well, not really at the moment because of the war, but Hamas controlled Gaza anyway, and Fatah controlled the West Bank, which by itself is a disputed territory. Thank you to Jane as well. He says one day the UK Prime Minister will remember he is the Prime Minister of the UK. Stopping the boats is his priority and protecting his own borders, says Jane. My goodness, imagine we could have a Prime Minister who does that. Lots to discuss. Let us know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We're also talking to Nick Tyrone in a minute, political columnist and author, in regard to Peter Kyle, and also the Talk exclusive about the life of luxury inside migrant hotels. Stay with us here on Talk.
they have a political agenda that is not in the interest of this country. Yeah. It's costing the NHS billions. Doctor strikes, it's about the 12th strike we've had in about 2 years. It's cost about $1.5 billion. And if you look at what Rachel Reeves is doing with the economy, well, I mean, all of your listeners will know, Mike, we don't have that kind of money. No. It's not good for patient safety. People die during these strikes, operations delayed, people not getting the care that they need. And that's why I've said, right, enough, let's just ban these strikes and get doctors back to work. I said at the time, this bill is not going to work. I actually managed to get it watered down. The version we're seeing is the watered down version. It's very hard, you know, when you're in government. There are lots of people who want certain measures. We do need to do things to protect children from a lot of the harm that's online. But I could just see the way it was written, that as usual, it would go after people doing perfectly legitimate things, and the bad guys will still find a way to circumvent the rules. This is the story of our times.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, those extraordinary clips are really worthy of comment, I think, this afternoon. Lots of people getting in touch. We'll get to your calls and texts and tweets and voice notes a little bit later on. 0344 499 1000, of course, the best number to give us a ring on and send your voice notes and your WhatsApp text messages in. And normal text messages, of course, 87222 with the word talk in your text. Let's just remind ourselves of the comments Peter Cardwell, the Technology Secretary, said on Sky News this morning about Nigel Farage.
We have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'd be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side.
Peter Cardwell there, Nigel Farage responding.
Well, this is so absolutely disgusting that it's almost beyond belief. Just how low can a Labour government sink in its desperation? Yes, of course, they're in trouble. They're well behind us in the opinion polls. But frankly, to say that I would do anything that would in any way aid and abet people like Jimmy Savile is frankly just, it's so below the belt, it's almost not true. But all of this is, of course, deflection. Deflection because we were told from the very start, and by the way, it's not the Labour government that have passed this legislation, it was the previous Conservative government that have passed this legislation, which is why you've barely heard a squeak out of them. But if it's designed to protect children, then I sense it may very, very well have been drawn up by people who don't know what they're doing.
Well, Nick Tyrone is a political columnist and author. Nick, you're very welcome to the programme. What do you make of this?
I think the words by Peter Cardwell are grotesque. I think they're awful. There's many things I could say about them. I'll stick, for the sake of brevity, to two. One is, this is the Secretary of State of His Majesty's government, comparing another politician to Jimmy Savile, basically saying, if you disagree with us, then you are siding with predators. Labour's USP was supposed to be the grown-ups taking charge, right? This is both at the same time deeply childish and deeply sinister. The idea that if you disagree with the government, you're siding with predators, I think it's a terrible, terrible precedent to set. I think the second thing to say is that I have a lot of reservations about the Online Act, and so I suddenly feel lumped in with this Peter Cardwell generalization. I don't think I've ever felt further away from the Labour government, and frankly more sympathetic with Nigel Farage. I don't know if that was intentional on Peter Cardwell's part, but that is what's happened.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily be political bedfellows with Nigel Farage. You just think this is such an outrageous and stupid attack. It's really reductive. And I think it's actually beneath Peter Cardwell, who's someone I've interviewed a number of times, I think is usually an intelligent, relatively measured man. I wonder if he's been captured by the civil service. I wonder if his nose is too close to the mirror on this one and he's not seeing the wider context of this. I wonder whether it's a deliberate attack because they want us to stop talking about Trump slagging off Starmer's plans yesterday and how awkward that press conference was. You can be a conspiracy theorist, you can be cynical about this, or perhaps it's just a cock-up. Maybe he genuinely does believe it, and that is almost the worst explanation, actually.
Yes, him actually believing it is definitely the worst possibility. And I think probably the one that's closest to the truth, at least in some respect. They're threatened by Farage. They want to try and minimize the threat. I would say if they want to minimize the threat posed by Nigel Farage and his party, they could just govern well. They could give that a shot, that a try. Clearly, at the moment, they don't think that is possible, and so they're resorting to this rubbish. And just frankly, it's embarrassing for the country.
Nick, I know you have some thoughts as well on our Talk exclusive story yesterday in regard to the migrant hotels, the luxury life that many migrants are experiencing there, the kind of facilities, the kind of freebies, the things that people can do there, that so many people who are not asylum seekers simply do not have these games consoles, computers, designer clothing in hotel rooms, for example. There are people who are really milking this and not acting in a way that is consistent with, first of all, not having a lot of money, but also seeking asylum and saying, please, can you do me a favour and bring me into your country because I'm a victim of political persecution. There are so many ways in which people are living in these hotels that just are not consistent with the fact that we're being told, oh, actually, they're 1- and 2-star hotels. Well, actually, the kind of meals people are having and the life they're experiencing are really quite luxury.
Well, indeed. I have actually myself stayed in a few migrant hotels, generally unwittingly. But I can testify to the fact that they, A, exist, and B, are largely filled with young men, generally in their 20s. And the idea that we can just ignore the fact that basically this is a racket. This is a whole thing, right? Young men are seeing this as, they're seeing Britain as a soft touch. They're being told by people traffickers that, listen, you go to the UK, you get across the channel, you show up, they'll bus you to a hotel, you'll stay there, you'll have 3 meals, it'll be great. And in fact, there's a whole black economy in the UK where you can work and no one's going to question it, and you'll have a great life. And I just think this is eroding faith in everything. This is eroding faith, I mean, in democracy and how, people's voices being heard. I think it's eroding people's faith in the whole idea of immigration. And I think one of the reasons that the whole Overton window in the UK is moving to the right on immigration is largely because of this issue, the boats and the migrant hotels.
Well, the fundamental bit is the fairness bit. I mean, you mentioned we had Godwin's law earlier on. We're now having the Overton window of really the idea of what's acceptable within political debate and what's acceptable to discuss and to accept. And really, this is changing people's minds, isn't it?
It is completely. Partly because if you go to a town where there's a migrant hotel, what you're having is, so a major fixture of the town has been taken over, essentially. It's now off limits to them, basically. And then they're being told if you complain about it or you have anything to say about it, then you are racist, you're an Islamophobe. We've seen it in Epping, where a lot of just very normal people, just very, people who probably aren't that politically engaged, generally speaking, turning out to protest and say, do you know what, we just don't really want this in the town. And we don't think we're racist for doing this. We just don't feel, why has this problem that we didn't ask for, that has just been dumped on us, essentially. You see it all over the country. Happens all over the place.
Yeah.
I've seen it in Rotherham, for instance. That's just obviously a big one that everyone will know, but it's happening all over the country.
Nick, thank you. That's Nick Tyrone there, political columnist and author. And we are actually talking about Rotherham a little bit later in the programme, because 5 women who were exploited by rape gangs in Rotherham as children say they were also abused by police officers in the town at the time. Some of the detail of that is just extraordinary and really horrendous and shocking. Back to Peter Kyle now, the technology secretary, who has compared Nigel Farage to Jimmy Savile because he doesn't agree with him. Lots of people getting in touch, including Peter in Croydon, who says, I suppose that makes us all pro-Savile now we're against the online safety bill. What a plonker Peter Kyle is. As for Starmer, the only roadmap he needs is one to a faraway place like the Amazon. Well, Matt's in Cheshire and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Matt, what do you make of this?
Hi, good afternoon, Peter. We're only 1 year in, and Labour are already getting desperate with the slurs and the flinging around of ridiculous comments, and they just can't stop themselves from sort of being nasty to people. You know, we've heard it for years, these little vindictive outbursts. That
I think you're right. And the thing is as well, Matt, that for so long we were told, as was pointed out earlier on, we're the grown-ups, you know, we're going to raise the level of debate, we're going to have we're going to, you know, have disagreements without being disagreeable, we're going to have reasonable conversations, and if we debate and disagree, that's fine. It's those awful, evil right-wing Nigel Farage types who just make it so reductive and make it so horrible and heads banging, and you know, you either agree with us or you're a terrible person. But that's exactly what Peter Kyle is doing there. Now, I have reservations. I have a lot of reservations about the online safety bill. I think by its very nature, this type of legislation is always going to be behind the technology because it takes so long to go through. Even if it takes a year or 2 years to go through, well, the technology is going to have moved on to a huge degree. AI, for example, will change an awful lot of the things that are in the Online Safety Act anyway. And here he is comparing Nigel Farage to Jimmy Savile. It's absurd.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen Peter Cardwell quite a few times over the years doing the media rounds and in debates. And I will disagree with you on one thing. He's pretty thick for somebody who thinks he's intelligent and tries to sound. All he does is learn his brief like a parrot. And then he just does the rounds and just parrots out the same.
Well, if that's what he's doing, Matt, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but if that's what he's doing, has he the wherewithal to have the independent thought to say, right, I'm just going to go for Farage on this? Or do you think this was cooked up on Number 10 and he was told to say it?
I mean, if that's the case, then part of me thinks that, is it Morgan McSweeney? He's purposely trying to ruin Starmer's career by the looks of it.
Well, and certainly it was Farage who said, look, they're going to come for me. They're really going to, you know, attempt to destroy his character anyway.
If anybody, Peter, is endangering people and putting children and women's safety in doubt, it's Labour by putting unknown foreign men in hotels, next to schools, facing schools. The absolute ridiculousness and the contrary nature of what they're actually saying. They're so unaware of how much the public despise them that, or maybe they do know now, and that's where this sort of vindictive streak comes from. I think a lot of them know they're already on a hiding to nothing.
They're cornered.
They're
cornered in a lot of ways, Matt, and I think an awful lot of what you say is absolutely very sensible and excellent political analysis, so thank you for that. That's Matt in Cheshire there, one of our regular callers who always speaks sense, even if I don't entirely agree with them on everything, and that usually I do. Jake Wallace-Simons is coming up in a second. He's going to talk about Starmer again, who is Starmer had a emergency cabinet meeting at 2 o'clock today about the problems in Gaza. He also says he's going to outline a roadmap about how Palestine can be recognised as a state. Is that a good idea? We'll talk to Jake in a second. I don't think it is. I don't think Jake's going to think it is either. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much for all your comments that are coming in. Stephen Cambridge says, Cardi P, is this not classed as hate speech? Libel even? I wonder if the police will look into it. Not. I hope Nigel sues them. I don't think he's going to sue them necessarily, but I think he's made his point pretty well. We'll talk more about this as time goes on, but I want to find out what Jake Wallace-Simons, the author and columnist, thinks about this plan by Keir Starmer to recognise Palestine. We know that the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has said that France are going to do it. A number of other states around the world have done it, but what would it actually look like? Is it desirable? Surely it just rewards Hamas terrorists by saying you've put loads of pressure on us, therefore we're going to recognise Palestine as a state. Well, let's see what the Prime Minister said about Gaza yesterday. We know there's a humanitarian crisis there, and he talked about it during his discussions with Trump in Scotland yesterday.
Certainly speaking for the British public and myself, seeing those images of starving children in particular are revolting. And there's a sense of revulsion in the British public at what they're seeing. And they know, and we know, that humanitarian aid needs to get in at speed, at volume. Yes, some can be airdropped, and we're working with others, with the US, with Jordan, on that, but the trucks need to get in, because that's the only way you can get the volume in. And we do thank the President for the work he's done to try to get to a ceasefire, which we desperately need, but also to put aid in to the region. There needs to be much more of that. We need to galvanise other countries in support of getting that aid in. And yes, that does involve putting pressure on Israel, because it absolutely, this is a humanitarian catastrophe.
Well, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, was on with Mike Graham this morning on Morning Glory, talking about recognising Palestine as a state. This is what she had to say, Kemi Badenoch.
No. I think it would be the wrong thing to do at this point. There is a humanitarian crisis right now. That needs to be addressed. He should be talking about dropping aid packages, making sure that people there, you know, an international effort is being coordinated to look after the people who are suffering. There is a war on, and as you and I both know, and all your listeners will know, war is a terrible situation, and it means that there are many people who, through no fault of their own, are suffering. Let's see what we can do to help those people. But statehood gives Hamas power, and it's yet another gimmick. Okay, let's say we give statehood, and then what? Does the problem disappear? No, it doesn't. Doesn't fix anything at all. He's doing this to solve a political problem, because a lot of people in his cabinet want statehood for Palestine. They are student campaigners, lifelong campaigners. This is the sort of stuff that they like. And he's dealing with an internal party problem rather than dealing with the problems of this country.
Yeah. Well, the author and columnist Jake Wallace-Simons is with me now. He's the author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred and What to Do About It. Jake, is this just to do with a political problem, or is there a wider context here?
I think the political problem is a big part of it. If you look at the cabinet members and MPs who are pushing for this, many of them have large Muslim demographics in their own constituencies. Shabana Mahmood, for example, Birmingham, Ladywood, has 46% Muslim population. Wes Streeting, with his razor-thin majority...
He nearly lost, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
has 23% Muslim.
Yeah.
So I think that has a lot to do with it. But ultimately, he's playing to the gallery. He's saying to his Labour voters, please don't go and vote for a Gaza independent at the next opportunity. Please don't go and vote for Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. Please stay with Labour. We're going to take your concerns seriously. It's interesting that, you know, Hamas, over the last couple of years, have reported 115 deaths from malnutrition. Whether or not that's true, we don't know. But in Ethiopia, in this year alone, there have been almost 75,000 deaths of malnutrition. In Bangladesh, up to 100,000. In Angola, 35,000. There isn't the same level of concern for those deaths of malnutrition. So it is a political thing first and foremost. Now, in terms of recognising a Palestinian state, quite how that will help get more aid to more people, I don't know. It's notable that recognising a Palestinian state is offered to them as a reward. In fact, those are the words that Peter Kyle, the science secretary, who we've just been talking about, used. He said it was the Palestinians deserve a reward of statehood, and yet there's no requirement placed on them at all. At the very least, the Palestinians should be required to A, renounce terrorism, and B, recognise the existence of the State of Israel in order for statehood to be granted to them. But those demands are nowhere to be seen. They're going to be rewarded effectively for October the 7th, while the Israelis are taking all the blame effectively for the disaster of October the 7th and the subsequent war, for the lack of aid. We know that a big part of the responsibility for the lack of aid to Gazans lies with the UN, which has been failing to deliver aid that the Israelis have put into the Strip because they're cross with the Israelis, don't want to work with them.
And Jake, at least some of the problem with this is Israel's making, is it not? At least some of the issue in regard to getting aid in and the problems with that and the blockade that has been there for the last few weeks has been Israel's fault, has it not?
Of course, Israel definitely has to bear some responsibility, but I would say that that responsibility lies in failure or in incompetence, in struggling with an impossible situation, rather than any intention to make enforce starvation upon the Gazans. Israel faces a difficult situation whereby Hamas has been stealing aid, using that money that it makes from selling the aid to keep itself afloat and keep itself in power.
So what do you make of the New York Times report a few days ago that said that Hamas was not systematically receiving and stealing aid from UNRWA and other UN bodies?
Well, sadly, it strikes me as an example of propaganda, because we've seen video footage after video footage of Hamas doing that exact thing, of mounting the aid convoys, stealing aid, holding up people.
The New York Times was citing Israeli military officials.
Well, look, the New York Times is just articulating propaganda coming out of the Strip. It's very, very clear that Hamas is stealing aid. That's been an open fact for many, many years now, at least since October the 7th. It's an open fact, it's been well documented and it's been filmed. So quite where they got that idea from which security source, it's not true, it's untrue. They also published, by the way, that picture of that allegedly starving baby, that awful photograph of that baby, the harrowing picture of the baby, that skeletal baby who turned out to actually have an endemic congenital health disorder. And so, you know, it's not exactly a squeaky clean publication, sadly, as every single publication and every broadcaster, particularly on the left, seems to have a fondness for articulating Hamas propaganda and not for the facts.
Yeah, there is a lot, of course, there are starving people in Gaza. We need to get that sorted. Do you think that Keir Starmer is right to hold a cabinet meeting about it this afternoon, an emergency one?
Well, like I say, I mean, you know, there are far bigger examples of starvation around the world. I just mentioned some of them. He doesn't hold emergency meetings about those. But I understand the political pressure. And of course, the suffering in Gaza should be recognised. It's not like I'm trying to downplay it or ignore it. It's right that we need to address that. And it's right that something needs to be done. But I think his mistake is in placing all of the blame upon Israel for this. Israel didn't ask for this war, didn't start this war, hasn't occupied Gaza since 2005 when it unilaterally withdrew. Israel mustn't shoulder all of the blame for this. It's trying its best to feed the civilians while combating Hamas. It's working against a terrorist organisation that uses the starvation of its own civilians as a propaganda campaign, hand in glove with the UN. I mean, if you ask me, the fact that the UN has failed to deliver tons and tons of aid that Israel has delivered to Gaza, to the people who need it, if that's not a war crime, I don't know what is.
Closer to home, Gary Lineker, the former Match of the Day presenter, has admitted he was sacked from the BBC after sharing the pro-Gaza video likening supporters of Israel to rats. I mean, we thought this was the case. He says that he is not for the killing of children, always good to have to clarify that, and he says he's not an anti-Semite. Do you believe him?
Well, look, I always find it difficult to say that I'll look into somebody's soul and divine whether they're an anti-Semite or not. Certainly, Gary Lineker swims in the swamp of left-wing inflammatory material, both online and amongst his peers. The people he hangs out with, the stuff he comes out with, it's obviously taken from propaganda. And, you know, if you're on the left, that's your misfortune. You're going to be surrounded by this stuff. It's difficult enough for somebody who's not on the left to remain impervious to the propaganda because the weight of it is so extreme on social media in particular, but also on many of our broadcasters and some of our papers. But if you're on the left, it's very difficult to resist those narratives that are pushed with so much tenacity by vested interests. I guess he's just fallen victim to it like everybody else.
I am anti the killing of children, says Gary Lineker. As I say, always good to have to clarify that point. Jake, thanks for joining us today. Jake Wallace-Simons, author and columnist, author of Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred, and What to Do About It. James has been in touch and says it's Hamas propaganda because it's Hamas that are the ones starving their own people, but the mainstream media are pumping out the lies. Jill in East Devon says, a bit ironic that this Labour MP brought up Jimmy Savile, and Keir Starmer would probably want to forget that name. Dan in Kent, afternoon Peter. Peter Kyle is so unprofessional, aligning Farage with paedophiles simply because he voted against the online safety bill. Isn't Parliament there to discuss bills and vote accordingly? Comments like these are not only cementing Reform UK, because the people are not stupid. Steve in Cambridge says Starmer on Palestine is not talking for the British people. It's his big nose and ego that he thinks keeps him relevant on the world stage. And a final one from Jason in Bristol here. Great show as always. So Keir Starmer can call an emergency meeting about Gaza but can't call an emergency meeting about the illegal migrants. Lots more to discuss. We're going to talk about, in just a few minutes actually after the break, we're going to talk about Southport. Believe it or not, it is 1 year on. Breaking news here, the UK will recognise a state of Palestine from September. That is what we are being told. I would imagine we now have a readout in regard to what happened at Cabinet. I will have been emailed that as one of the political journalists who receives them. I'm just going to update my emails now and see if it has come through and see if I can... Yes, Cabinet readout here. The Prime Minister opened by saying that he had called the meeting to address the situation in Gaza, which was getting more desperate by the day. He said the recent images of starvation had deeply affected the British public and underscored the increasingly intolerable situation. He said the government had always been clear that the terrorist attacks of the 7th of October were an outrage and that Hamas is a terrorist organisation who continue to hold hostages in terrible conditions. He set out ways at Cabinet in which the government is providing aid to Gaza, with the first airdrops of British aid landing today containing around £500,000 worth of life-saving supplies and the acceleration of medical evacuations of sick and injured children from Gaza. Keir Starmer updated Cabinet on his call with the King of Jordan about that as well. The Prime Minister was clear that an immediate ceasefire in Gaza remains the overwhelming priority. He did discussions with France and Germany about that, and on the recognition point, turning to recognition, the Prime Minister said it had been his government's long-standing position that recognition of a Palestinian state was an inalienable right of the Palestinian people, and that he would recognise a Palestinian state as part of a process to peace and a two-state solution. I'll read the rest of this. It's pretty long. I'll not read everything. I'll read it in the break. I'll update you in just a few minutes exactly what happened at Cabinet. We'll also talk about 1 year on from Southport, believe it or not. Stay with us here on Talk.
This was obviously someone who needed to be taken off the streets, who needed to be dealt with, who needed to be put in some kind of institution, and yet because he didn't fit into one category or the other, it was a computer says no. It was totally, yeah. So, and then it's because of that kind of fundamental failure, because of the fact that this is the sort of thing that people have almost come to expect from a government and a state that seemingly can't keep even its most vulnerable citizens safe. It's precisely that mistrust of the establishment which helps create the kind of atmosphere that we saw afterwards.
Across across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
So the key point of what happened at Cabinet this afternoon, 2 o'clock, Keir Starmer's meeting, he said that because of the increasingly intolerable situation in Gaza and the diminishing prospect of a peace process towards a two-state solution, now was the right time to move this position forward. He said that the UK will recognise the state of Palestine in September, before the UN General Assembly that happens in New York in late September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, reaches a ceasefire, makes clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank, and commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. He reiterated that there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas, and that our demands on Hamas remain, and that they must release all the hostages signed up to a ceasefire, except that they will play no role in the government of Gaza and disarm. To me, that sounds as if he's putting the pressure on Israel. Is this all Israel's fault? What about Hamas? We'll discuss this at 5 o'clock because we've got a guest on about this who will discuss that. But there's a major shift in what the UK government is doing, how they're viewing the Middle East, saying that they will recognise a Palestinian state. Is this for political reasons? Is this for because of what is happening in the region? Lots of analysis coming your way between now and 7 o'clock. But in the meantime, I want to make sure we just take a few minutes to remember that it is a year today since the Southport attacks. The MP for the area, Labour MP Patrick Hurley, says it would be a really emotional day for the seaside town, which was bearing the long-lasting detrimental psychological and emotional impact of the attack. Well, around the time I interviewed Norman Wallace, who is the Chief Executive of Southport Pleasureland. Norman, it's a privilege to speak to you again. You spoke so well a year ago. A year on, how is Southport marking today and attempting to heal from this horrendous tragedy?
Well, we've all just marked it by a 3-minute silence. We closed the park for 3 minutes. Adventure goes. And it's devastated the town. The effects that it's having on the town are still prominent today. Just awful, just awful. Pretty much all the business has been affected very badly, but none, of course, as much as the poor family. Terrible tragedy.
And as we remember the 6-year-old BB King, Elsie Stancombe, who was 7, and Alistair Silva Aguirre, who was 9, their families, of course, are keeping away largely from the limelight today.
Well, they are, but again, I think you're putting photographs there from last year, and council and locals have asked for people not to do that. The town must move on. The town must definitely move on, and we must not be defined by one tragic incident committed by one demon that was brought in from elsewhere that committed this terrible crime. It's one person in a dance class, in a street, in a town that happens to be my town, and we cannot be defined by that. Southport is a great place to live, to work, and to visit. It's a fabulous town. We are all lucky to live here, and people are lucky to be able to visit. And there is much more to Southport than people realise. And we have a great town, a great sense of community, which was seen last year and is still being continued today. And we must allow those families to grieve and move on.
Southport is a great town, and it's a place where a very good friend of mine is from, actually. And I know you've been lowering flags in public buildings today in tribute to those caught up in the attack. And you're absolutely right in that Southport can't just be defined by what happened on one day. Is there a sense that because the perpetrator, Axel Rudakubana, is behind bars, that he has been convicted, that actually in some sense justice has been done and Southport can begin to move on?
I think the biggest thing that we are subject to at the moment is every possible chance that the media can get to connect something else happened elsewhere to Rudakubana and Southport. They take that opportunity. And I think many people would now wish that the media would leave that behind and stop talking about it. I hope that from this day on now, we can remember those children We can help those families as much as possible, and we can stop talking about this demon that committed this terrible crime.
You, of course, run a really important business in the area, Southport Pleasureland. Today, are people coming to Pleasureland, or they're enjoying themselves, they're enjoying the summertime? I mean, how are you sort of running a business, making sure that the town is thriving and is growing at the same time as marking this anniversary today?
It's actually called Adventure Coast now.
Oh.
And we have had people in the park, and we have done a 3-minute silence. Completely silent, and the rest of the town has done the same to mark this. So, you know, people, when this tragedy happened, felt that they were unable to go out, and we have suffered since the 29th of July of last year. Within 1 hour of this incident happening, we had a lady at our front gate. She said her husband was a policeman, saying that we should close the gates, and told us that this had happened. And since that day, the whole town has suffered. Everyone. None, of course, as much as the poor families. And my heart goes out to them every single day. And I could not imagine not being able to put my arms around my children and love them each and cuddle them each day. It's absolutely terrible. But we must be allowed as a town to move on. And I sincerely hope that the media allows us to do that, and not at any possible chance that they get putting this demon together with other issues in the country.
Norman, thank you. Those are wise words from you again. I really appreciate you joining us. That's Norman Wallace there. Thank you to him. Your thoughts on all of this, 0344 499 1000. Plenty on the cabinet in a second.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is Talk Drive. The big breaking story in the last 10 minutes is the fact that the UK will recognise a Palestinian state from September. That is what the Prime Minister has said. We'll bring you his words as soon as we can. We've had a readout, an email that's come from Number 10 talking about what happened in Cabinet today because of the increasingly intolerable situation in Gaza and the diminishing prospect of a peace process towards a two-state solution. Now, the Prime Minister believes, is the right time to move the position forward. He said the UK will recognise the state of Palestine in September before the UN General Assembly, which is when all the major nations of the world come together, all the United Nations come together in New York. That's usually in the last week or two of September. We'll get instant reaction from Nicole Lambert to that in just a second. Stay with us for that. Also, Nigel Evans, the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, will be with us. What do you think? Is now the right time to recognise a Palestinian state, or does it, as I think, actually reward Hamas terrorists for what they have done since the 7th of October? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note, less than a minute, please. 0344 499 1000. You can use that number as well for WhatsApp text messages and to give me a ring. Loads to discuss between now and 7 o'clock. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, Keir Starmer has made an address. We'll bring it to you as soon as we can. He says the UK's goal remains a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. That goal, however, is under pressure like never before, he says. He's added that he has always said the UK would recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact. Well, my question in regard to that, and Nicole Lambert joins us now, the journalist who is right across all these issues of anti-Semitism in the UK and what is happening in the Middle East. Nicole, my question with this would be, he says that the idea is to recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process. There basically is no proper peace process. The moment of maximum impact, well, actually, will this change anything? First of all, your reaction to the fact it's happened, and then secondly, your reaction, if you would, to what Keir Starmer's reasoning for it is.
I have to say, I'm shocked, I'm horrified, I'm disgusted with our government, absolutely disgusted, to put all the onus on Israel with this, with their readout.
Everything they say, it basically says it's all Israel's fault. They're saying unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, reaches a ceasefire, makes clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank, and commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. What about Hamas? There's nothing about them giving back the hostages. They do say they must release all the hostages, but they're not saying that's conditional on any of this.
But they're completely ignoring Hamas and the fact that it's a terrorist group, and it's a terrorist group that has made no secret of the fact that it wants to destroy Israel. It doesn't want a two-state solution. It wants the entire region. And it's not like the Palestinian Authority are much better. So they're completely, this is our government caving in to a loud group, a loud minority who are making these demands of the MPs. This is about British politics. It will have no impact on Israel and the way it behaves, but it does have an impact on all of us in this country, because it shows perhaps that terrorism works. Is that what our government is telling us? Because this is absolutely unbelievable.
It is something that Keir Starmer says will be done at the moment of maximum impact. Do you think it will have any actual impact on what happens in the Middle East?
No, because Hamas walked away from a ceasefire last week. So if Hamas was willing, this only actually gives them strength. This is saying the West is on our side, and it gives them victory, and that's the most appalling thing of all. Like no one will forget what happened on October 7th. Everyone remembers seeing the scenes of what happened, and the fact that there are still 50 hostages there, 20 alive. And some of them have British links. And our government has completely forgotten about all of those, or said that doesn't matter. But the thing is that it's the most ridiculous thing, and the thing that angers me, is that we in this country, we know what Islamic fundamentalism is. We have experienced it ourselves. One of my school friends was murdered by the 7/7 bombers. So we know what that is like. And they are caving in to the same ideology, pretending that this is about land when it's not. It's about values. It's about are we against terrorism or not? And our government is saying we are on the side of the terrorists. We are pro-terrorist. And that's the thing that I'm almost speechless. I'm so angry.
It was interesting, a few days ago, Keir Starmer said, well, now is not the time, and this is a manifesto commitment. It was in Labour's manifesto. It's been policy of the Labour Party for a long period of time. But to actually move on it and to essentially contradict what he said a few days ago, to me, as a sort of political specialist, says that he's giving in to the political pressure of these 225 MPs or so who are talking about the fact that they want this to happen. He's weak. This is from a position of weakness, I think, politically, Nicole, but it's going to have huge ramifications for the Jewish community in this country. It's going to have huge ramifications for our standing on the world stage as well. And we're aligning ourselves with France, for example, and other nations, and I think we're further away than America. I don't think it's an accident that this has happened a day after the meeting with Donald Trump. Had it happened before then, I think it would have been problematic as well. I wonder what your reaction to that is.
Yeah, well, we know that there were quite a few. There were some Labour MPs that lost their seats to Islamists. Yep. And then there were 30 Labour MPs whose seats are under threat. Obviously, the Jeremy Corbyn party is going to also eke away at that, as are the Greens. They're all fighting on this idea of Gaza, which actually Britain has no control over anyway. So there was a Foreign Affairs Select Committee that did its report, that reported at the end of last week, and they said that Britain has no influence in the Middle East. Our biggest influence is on America. And so what we've seen is that actually we are moving more away from America's vision. So we're going to have even less influence than we were before. And really, Britain does have an important role. What we have to say is important in this is that this is our mess to start with. This is because Britain promised the land to 3 different groups of people. They promised the larger area of Palestine that included Transjordan to the Hashemites, the Arabs, and the Jews. And they divided it, and they divided it so badly that, of course, it was never going to work. And that's what's happened. And so, what does the state of Palestine look like? Who's going to run it? What are its borders? Are you talking about 1967? So do you mean that you're going to be throwing all the Jews out of Jerusalem and the West Bank? It's completely ridiculous. Who's going to run it? Is it going to be a terrorist state? Okay. All of these questions, and this is just down to British politics and the fact that Labour wants to keep its. Okay.
Nicole, thank you. Let's see if we can get some answers to some of those questions. David Lammy is speaking to the UN in New York right now. Let's cross to there and hear what the Foreign Secretary is saying.
Reflect on the past. 108 years ago, my predecessor as British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, signed the declaration that bears his name. It helped lay the foundations for a homeland for the Jewish people. And Britain can be proud of that. Our support for Israel, its right to exist, and the security of its people is steadfast. However, the Balfour Declaration came with the solemn promise that nothing shall be done, nothing which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the Palestinian people as well. And colleagues, this has not been upheld, and it is a historical injustice which continues to unfold. As diplomats and politicians, we have become accustomed to uttering the words, a two-state solution. Countless times, this Assembly and the Security Council has proclaimed that there must be a two-state resolution. Resolution after resolution. Resolution 181. Resolution 242. Resolution 446. Resolution 1515. Resolution 2334. These cannot be just numbers on a page, but the conviction of a deeply frustrated world. Chairs, Hamas must never be rewarded for the monstrous attack on October the 7th. It must immediately release the hostages, agree to an immediate ceasefire, accept it will have no role in governing Gaza, and commit to disarmament. But Hamas are not the Palestinian people, and there is no contradiction between support for Israel's security and support for Palestinian statehood. Indeed, the opposite is true. Let me be clear. The Netanyahu government's rejection of a two-state solution is wrong. It's wrong morally and it's wrong strategically. It harms the interests of the Israeli people, closing off the only path to a just and lasting peace. And that is why we are determined to protect the viability of a two-state solution. And so it is with the hand of history on our shoulders that His Majesty's government therefore intends to recognize the state of Palestine when the UN General Assembly gathers in September here in New York.
That is the Foreign Secretary David Lammy speaking at the UN in New York. He said that Hamas must never be rewarded. Why are you recognising a Palestinian state then? He says that Hamas should have no role in governing Gaza. He said we have the hand of history on our shoulder, which is exactly what Tony Blair talked about when he was talking about the Belfast Agreement, when that was signed. And he said that in the UN at the General Assembly, which starts on the 9th of September, they will be recognising a Palestinian state. The United Kingdom's government's position will be that a Palestinian state is recognised. Well, Nigel Evans is former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, former Conservative MP for the Ribble Valley. Nigel, your reaction to this?
I'm deeply embarrassed and deeply ashamed by what I've just heard David Lammy say. He says he doesn't want to reward Hamas, but that's exactly what is going on. In whose interest is it now to continue the terrorism that took place on October the 7th? And since that date, it is the decision now to recognise the Palestinian state without any conditions whatsoever. It's quite remarkable, Peter, that it was only a few weeks ago that Macron in France said that there were several conditions that had to be met before Palestine was going to be recognised as a state. And then all of a sudden, he has said that France will now recognise Palestine without any of those conditions being met. And David Lammy just said, without any conditions whatsoever then, in his speech to the United Nations, that in September, the United Kingdom will recognise Palestine. Yes, he has said that he wants the hostages released, but where is the leverage?
Well, the conditions appear to be on Israel. The conditions from this email that Number 10 have sent out, this readout telling us what happened in Cabinet today. He said that because of the increasingly intolerable situation in Gaza and the diminishing prospect of a peace process towards a two-state solution, the Prime Minister said now was the right time to move this position forward. He said the UK will recognise the state of Palestine in September before the UN General Assembly, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, reaches a ceasefire, makes clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank, and commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. So much of that, and so much of this position, and so much of what David Lammy was talking about is about what Israel is doing. I'm not saying Israel is perfect in this by any stretch of the imagination. I've been very critical of Benjamin Netanyahu and some of their actions on aid, for example. But the clear implication is that this is Israel's fault, when actually Hamas are not being let off scot-free, but they are getting a reward here. It does say in this they must release all the hostages, but where is the pressure to do that? The pressure today, as a result of this, is on Israel, is it not?
Yes. Let's remember October the 7th. Let's remember the massacre of all those young people at a music festival. And then the reaction or the response from Israel to October the 7th, there's no way that Israel could not react to the terrorist attack on its people in the way that they did. And yet now we've moved forward to a position where, since that attack on October the 7th, the British government is now going to recognise Palestine. I just think it is nonsensical, illogical, and absolutely no leverage whatsoever for the release of all those hostages that are still being held. I think it's just appalling.
How much of this is straightforward politics? How much of this is Keir Starmer looks back, sees what happened with the welfare bill and says, right, the tail is wagging the dog here. The Labour Party backbenches are telling me what to do and I've got to do it. 225 MPs, most of them Labour, say we've got to recognise the state of Palestine. Therefore, in contradiction almost to what he said a few days ago, he said now wasn't the time. Now he's saying now is the time. Why has that happened? Is it just because of the realpolitik of the backbench of the Labour Party saying you've got to do this, mate, and also looking over his shoulder at Jeremy Corbyn and the pro-Gaza MPs, some of whom are snapping at the heels within very small majorities of people like Wes Streeting?
And just remember as well, Peter, that Parliament is in recess.
Yeah.
This announcement has come shortly after Parliament went into recess. I think it's appalling. Parliament should now be recalled. I've absolutely no doubt.
You think Parliament should be recalled to debate this?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Parliament should be recalled in order for them to be able to express their views. And yes, I do believe that there is domestic politics at play in this. We know the pressure that has come from a lot of the backbenchers on the Labour Party. We saw it before the general election, and we've seen it absolutely since then. You've also got to remember that it's all well and good for the Prime Minister and David Lammy to talk about a two-state solution. Hamas want a one-state solution.
Correct.
They want the absolute obliteration of the state of Israel. We have to remember that.
Nigel, thank you. That is a slightly shorter interview than we would have wanted to do because of the breaking news. But Nigel Evans, thank you, former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons. Sean says, I despise the UK government with every fibre of my existence. He's sent us that from Bridlington. Jenny and Bister says, so the UK recognises and France does too. However, the USA fully supports Israel. So what will change? More virtue signalling, says Jenny. Well, I think it's going to make very many problems with us, for us with the USA. Unsurprisingly, those meetings with Trump yesterday where I would imagine he wasn't told about this. Andy in Morecambe says it will never be a state, not in my name. Anne says, I believe the government has just signed the death warrant of the remaining hostages. There are 50 hostages still being held. We believe only 20 of them are alive. And that's a stark thing to say, but I think you might just be right in the sentiment anyway. There is no, or there is even less of an incentive for Hamas to release the hostages now when you have two major Western nations, France and the United Kingdom, recognising a state of Palestine. Leslie says it is despicable of Starmer over Palestine, purely political, to avoid a huge rebellion and keep his position. Leslie, I cannot agree with you more and disagree with Keir Starmer more. We're going to go live to Israel, to Yotam Confino, in just a few minutes. This is the breaking news this evening, within the last half an hour, that Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has said that he is going to recognise Palestine as a state. He says the UK's goal remains a safe and secure Israel, along with what he calls a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. That goal, however, is under pressure like never before. He said he has always said the UK will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact. Well, is this the moment of a maximum impact, or is this simply doing what his backbenchers are telling him to do? You let me know what you think about all of this. 0344 499 1000. We're in Israel next with Yotam. Stay with us.
How realistic do you think a ceasefire is this week?
There's a very good chance that we'll have a settlement, an agreement of some kind.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
What are you looking for here?
An end. A real end.
Well, all of a sudden he's a big shot because he has the U.S. on his side.
I am very disappointed with President Putin. He'll talk so beautifully and then he'll bomb people at night.
This was obviously someone who needed to be taken off the streets, who needed to be dealt with, who needed to be put in some kind of institution, and yet because he didn't fit into one category or the other, it was a computer says no.
It was totally, yeah.
So, and then it's because of that kind of fundamental failure, because of the fact that this is the sort of thing that people have almost come to expect from a government and a state that seemingly can't keep even its most vulnerable citizens safe. It's precisely that mistrust of the establishment which helps create the kind
across the UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
With the news that the UK is to recognise a Palestinian state, Jeff has been in touch and says the next thing Palestinians will be joining the UN. Will we supply missiles for Palestinians to defend themselves? Who is next? Graham and Bushy says, let's see if Trump now backtraps on the UK's trade agreement with the USA. I think that's a very good point, Graham, and I think this is no coincidence that it is the day after Keir Starmer has spoken to Donald Trump. David Lammy should be more concerned about the hand of God than the hand of history, says Stephen Stoke. And Mark in Oxfordshire says, I'm 55 years old and I've always been a proud Briton. Today I am ashamed of my country after hearing the statement for Lammy, and I am ashamed to be British. Well, let's remind ourselves about what the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has just said on recognising the state of Palestine, or a state of Palestine. He is at the United Nations in New York. This is what David Lammy has been saying in the last 20 minutes.
And so it is with the hand of history on our shoulders that His Majesty's government therefore intends to recognise the state of Palestine when the UN General Assembly gathers in September here in New York.
The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, in New York. Well, let's cross to Israel now. Yotam Confino, the correspondent, Middle East correspondent and author, is with us. Yotam, how is this likely to be received in Israel?
Well, the Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, earlier today commented on France that announced that they're going to recognize Palestine as a state at the upcoming UN General Assembly. And he said this is just not going to happen. There won't be a Palestinian state which will be run by jihadists just a few kilometers from densely populated areas in Israel. It's not going to happen. He's made it very clear. And by the way, so has Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for years. And I think especially now, after October the 7th, where we saw what the state of Palestine was doing from Gaza, because it was run by Hamas, who's been elected to run Gaza back in 2006, they saw exactly what that brought about. So, of course, Israel is not happy about this in any possible way. And I believe that there will be a strong statement coming later from both Netanyahu and from the foreign minister.
What do you make of some of the language that has been used around this, the hand of history on our shoulder, the Prime Minister saying that because of the increasingly intolerable situation in Gaza and the diminishing prospect of a peace process towards a two-state solution, now is the right time to move forward. He says that unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, reaches a ceasefire, it makes clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank, and commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. He reiterated there's no equivalence between Israel and Hamas, and that our demands on Hamas remain. They must release all the hostages, sign up to a ceasefire, accept that they play no role in the government of Gaza, and disarm. I mean, the fact is that Israel's being blamed here far more than Hamas is.
Look, it's astonishing. There are so many things I want to touch on. Let's begin with the fact that there are still 50 people held hostage inside Gaza, inside what is gonna be part of the state of Palestine. Will the United Kingdom really recognize an area where people are held hostage for nearly 2 years in some of the most horrendous conditions you can imagine? Which kind of signal are you sending? you're essentially saying that after Hamas committed the worst massacre in Israel's history, a war that's not over, you're essentially saying now is the right time to recognize Palestine. No, the right time to recognize Palestine was years ago. It's not now. The Palestinian society today is more radicalized than it probably has ever been. We've seen that throughout the last 21 months with people in Gaza celebrating like they won the World Cup when hostages were brought in, beaten to death in pickup trucks and on motorbikes. They were celebrating. They were celebrating when starved hostages were paraded on stages set up by Hamas. When coffins with babies were paraded, they were celebrating. So today is not the right time to recognize the Palestine. That would have been, I would say, years ago before the society got so radicalized that it is today. And by the way, just one final thing on the whole history thing that he's mentioning. The Palestinians said no to get their own state in 1948. Israel said yes. The Palestinians, along with Arab nations, tried to destroy and annihilate Israel the day after. Since then, they've continued to try and kill Israelis. Israelis have continued to kill them in response. This is just an endless cycle of violence that I don't think that Keir Starmer or David Lammy can solve by saying, well, we recognize you as a state.
What do you think? I mean, you've talked a little bit about the recognition, about the reaction to France recognising a state of Palestine. Now we've got another G7 Western nation doing this. The Americans, I don't think, are going to be particularly happy, but Israel is our ally. Israel has been an ally of the United Kingdom for a long period of time. We've got the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons saying they should recall Parliament to discuss this. Is there a tide that is moving against Israel here?
Absolutely. And I would also say the Netanyahu government is very much to blame for how isolated Israel is in the international system. The Netanyahu government has made some of the worst decisions you can make after having probably the most justifiable situation to launch a war in modern history after October the 7th, where you essentially had all of your allies with you. Time and time again, they have made decisions that they thought were going to give them more backing or better positions in the polls in Israel that actually benefited Israel itself. Blocking aid for 2 months back in March, not allowing journalists to come in and check what's happening inside Gaza. All of these things, it's something that Israel, to a large extent, has themselves to blame. But I would say, again, one last thing here when it comes to the recognition of Palestine. Who are you recognizing as the leader of Palestine?
Yeah, and where is it? Where is it? Where's the capital?
Well, we know where.
Who's the leader?
We know where it is.
Yeah,
we know where it is. It'll be Gaza. It'll be the West Bank.
But also within those internationally disputed borders as well. What does that actually say about the West Bank? I wonder as well. Just finally, Yotam, in regard to these humanitarian corridors being opened. That's clearly because of international pressure. I wonder if this international pressure will move Netanyahu's government to a position where some of the other international states, France and the UK, for example, and others, might be happier. Do you think it's likely that they take substantive steps to end the situation in Gaza, reach a ceasefire, talk about no annexation of the West Bank, committing to a long-term peace process? I mean, how likely is it, do you think, that any of that happens between now and September when this proposed recognition occurs?
Well, as for aid is already coming in vastly greater amounts than just last week, for example. Yesterday, 200 trucks worth of aid was picked up by the United Nations and international organizations. But when you're talking about the ceasefire, it's as if Keir Starmer doesn't know what's happening. And of course he knows what's happening. Israel has said yes over and over to the current proposal on the table to end the war for 60 days, period, and get some of the hostages out. Hamas keeps stalling, keep adding new demands. It's not just the United States and Israel saying that, it's also Qatar and Egypt. How on earth can you not see this? And how can you go out and say that it's up to Israel to implement a ceasefire? It takes two to tango. There's one party that doesn't want a ceasefire right now.
A very good point. Thank you, Yoram Confino, Middle East correspondent and author of Netanyahu's Israel Rise of the Far Right. Lots to discuss with this. We're going to be joined by our former Israeli Defence Force, Israeli Army Intelligence Officer, Dan Pfefferman. He's going to be with us after the break. Keep your thoughts coming in, 0344 499 1000. Cade in Wakefield says, I've never been so embarrassed to be British, cry the beloved country. And Stephen says, great show, the loony left do it again, recognising a terrorist-funded leadership of Palestine. Hamas pull the strings, Iran will be laughing, Trump will be raging. No mention yesterday when Starmer took the knee to Trump. Plenty more to come in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Phil in Portsmouth has been in touch and says, let's just hope that the rest of the world realises that David Lammy said it was His Majesty's government that will recognise a Palestinian state and not the British people. We really are the laughing stock of the world, says Phil. Gail in Harrogate says, every day I think this government cannot get worse, but they do. They are the lowest of the low. It just disgusts me. I'm ashamed to be British. It is so depressing, and I feel I'm wishing my life away until they're booted out, says Gail. Sean in County Durham says, Peter, open your eyes. Over 60,000 dead. Peter, you're mad if you think Israel have done nothing wrong. Sean, I don't think Israel haven't done things wrong. Of course they've done things wrong. I've said that over the course of this programme if you've been listening. Also 60,000 dead. That figure comes from Hamas. It is not verified. Would you trust Wikipedia? No? Well, why do you trust terrorists? That's what I would say about that. Let's speak to Dan Pfefferman, who is a former IDF intelligence officer. Dan, you're very welcome to the programme. What do you make of this breaking news that the UK will be recognising a Palestinian state?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I listened literally just minutes ago to Prime Minister Starmer's statement, and I want to highlight, the timing is a problem. Some of the content of what the Prime Minister said is correct. The clear iteration that Hamas is a terrorist entity that can have no part in any future Palestinian entity, that must be disarmed, that must surrender, those are all the right notes. The problem is the timing and the tone. So what you have here essentially is a threat to Israel that if Israel doesn't play ball, then essentially the Palestinians will get a reward for October 7th, and that is a Palestinian state. And that's really the problem here. You also have another problem that people casually tend to ignore, and that is the supposedly moderate Palestinians in Ramallah, in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, have never reformed their entire... First of all, they don't have the capability to do any kind of governance, and so I listened to your previous guest said, who would actually run this Palestinian state? They have zero capability. They have zero civil society infrastructure. They're deeply corrupt. They lack popularity amongst their own people. They lack the ability to control this street or have any kind of security control. They would be defeated soundly by Hamas in the West Bank without Israel's support if they were to take over. So that's another key issue. But the bigger one is they still remain deeply committed to not having a Jewish state alongside of them. Yeah. The Palestinians have never clearly made their intentions that they are willing to end this conflict once and for all and recognize Israel as a Jewish state, as the homeland of the Jewish people, and that they want to live alongside Israel peacefully. And until they do so, until they take out the deep anti-Semitism from their school curricula, from their media, from their entire society, there's not much to talk about here.
And a lot of what has been said by Starmer, saying unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, reaches a ceasefire, makes clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank and commits to a long-term peace process that delivers a two-state solution. They're going ahead with this. To me, it seems as if the government here in London is blaming the Israelis for the situation that's there. I'm not saying the Israeli government is absolutely, not responsible for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, at least to some degree, although Hamas are, of course, as well. And they started things with the appalling atrocities on the 7th of October 2023. Nonetheless, my view here in London, as a political specialist, Dan, is that this is about the politics of the UK far more than the Middle East. Is there any appreciation, thoughts about that from your angle? What do you think about that side of things?
First of all, that sounds pretty accurate. Is what you're seeing in the UK, what you're seeing in France with the conference that was held at the UN, probably has a lot to do with domestic politics and the increasing growing Muslim constituents in the country and the need to appease them. I appreciate that it's a fine line to walk between wanting to do something that seems substantive on the Israel-Palestine issue without completely supporting Hamas position. But I think this is the wrong move. By the way, I think it's important that in the UK, people appreciate that a lot of the statements, and it's important to separate statements from moves that you see happening in Israel, are also to placate a fairly right-wing public that was really traumatized and scarred by October 7th. What you need right now is a situation that first and foremost takes into account both the situation on the ground in Gaza, and it's very important that while Israel has made a lot of mistakes, cutting off aid back in March, etc., the general intent of the Israeli strategy is correct. Hamas has to be isolated from the mechanisms of aid because they are hijacking some 80 to 90% of the aid, and that is how they maintain their control over Gaza. They use it to keep their own forces fed and happy, and to make sure that they are the ones in power, and they sell it back. They hijack it and sell it back at exorbitant rates to the people of Gaza, who are suffering. It must be said the people of Gaza are suffering, but it is mostly Hamas's deliberate actions and then some bad decisions on the part of Israel about how to navigate this tricky situation. What you need right now is an embracing of Israel. These kinds of statements about the West Bank, about annexations, about etc., those need to be made behind the scenes and not on public podiums. And Israel needs to be embraced as an ally at this time, because any time that there is this daylight, this showmanship against Israel at this time, Hamas takes it, and they say it in their own words. We need to listen to what Hamas says. They take it as a win for their positions because it increases the pressure on Israel, and then it keeps Hamas in power. And as you see, they reject ceasefire options time and again, and it will only perpetuate this conflict so long as such grandstanding takes place in Western capitals.
Dan, thank you. That's Dan Pfefferman there, former IDF intelligence officer. He's also the founder of Middle East 24. Let's go to the phone lines now and our viewers and listeners who are in touch. Thank you, first of all, to Michael. He says, I'm beyond disgusted with our feeble government and the Prime Minister is the morals of a gutter snipe. That's Michael in Hockley. Pete in Lincolnshire says Lammy is an embarrassment to this country. He has a personal agenda and is using his position of power to make bad decisions, going against almost 70% of voters. We need to make a stand against this rubbish government, says Pete in Lincolnshire. Andrew is in Hertfordshire and has some views on this. Andrew, you're very welcome to the programme. What do you think of what's happened in the last hour?
I'd like to unreservedly apologise to the Jewish people and the Jewish state for what this government has done. They have effectively signed up to the end of Israel because, as you quite rightly said with your guest there, Hamas wants the whole piece. Mm-hmm. Now, this it shows the two most powerful people in the world have won. Iran sponsors Hamas to get rid of Israel, and Jeremy Corbyn is still running the Labour Party. This is a day of complete shame. Free Palestine, that mad group that's just been prescribed, where are we with that now?
Palestine Action, yeah, well, they are a prescribed group, they are, and the arrests have been made of some of their supporters, but their aim certainly would be recognition of a Palestinian state, so certainly they will be happy today, Andrew.
Yeah, and we've done this. It's all theatre. Trump has gone, he's in the air, we've done it. He needs to land, and he needs to put a 20% tariff on our country. I'd rather eat less, not have a new iPhone. This is not funny. The end of this state of Israel, and that is what Starmer, for his own political purposes, is perpetrating here.
I think, Andrew, I agree with every single word you've said, and I also think that this is far more about domestic politics than it is about the politics of the Middle East.
I phoned into both Mike Graham and Julia about this. I've been saying this for 5 days. So this is the same position as Tony Banks and the hunting. They gave him that, and then Blair got control of the party. Yeah. If Starmer gives them this, then they won't vote anything down for him. That it's internal British politics dressed up with the face of a clown Lammy. I mean, you broadcast what he just is. He's as thick as mince.
I have 2 words to reply to that, Andrew. Celebrity mastermind. Thank you. That's Andrew in Hertfordshire there. Neil is in London and has some thoughts on this as well. Neil, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Thanks, Peter. A big fan of your show. I haven't spoken to you before.
Thank you. Good to talk to you, Neil.
I was driving my car and shouting. I mean, when you know that you're shouting out loud to yourself, and almost thumped my windscreen in, I was so angry. I'm Jewish, but I'm pretty well balanced in as much as I'll always side with Israel, and they're probably 80-90% in the right. But I can see that there are things that Netanyahu's gone to extreme. There was a certain degree, I don't know what the percentage is, of the aid not getting through properly. I blame most of it on the reasons that we talked about, the UN, etc. But I mean, just a little thought. I mean, it's probably not true, but you know, the way he was humiliated by Trump yesterday, is this some sort of revenge of the way he was treated? Because he's gone back on what he said a week ago.
This is what I think is really interesting as well. He has changed his tune, and he knows, again, I would argue this is welfare all over again. It's my belief this has so much to do with domestic politics. He knows the backbenches of the Labour Party are the tail wagging the dog of the leadership of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister at the moment, because he couldn't say it the other day. He couldn't say it to Donald Trump. He waited until Donald Trump was basically out of the picture, and now he's saying, right, you know, Lammy's at the UN, Parliament's in recess, this is the optimum time to say, right, we're going to have this emergency cabinet meeting on Gaza. Well, you could have had that at any stage over the last 2 years, but he's having it today, and then he's coming out with this.
Cowardly by him, and what Evan said is quite right. They've got to have an emergency meeting of Parliament, although, of course, with only just over 100 MPs, the Tories are against it, but they're not going to have any say on it. So, yes, it's about appeasing the Muslim vote, which, of course, is going to get much worse in the future, for there's probably, 3 or 4 million Muslim adults at the moment. That's going to get a lot larger in the future, the way things are going. People possibly voting for the Corbyn party. But I was confused, because is this going to happen? He says this is going to happen, and then he says, but it depends on what Israel does if it meets the conditions, which we know it won't. But if it does meet the conditions, is he not going to do it? So is it one? Which one is it?
Well, I think this is an idea to put pressure on Israel. He said these demands, which, as we both know, are not going to happen. And also he said things like Israel reaches a ceasefire. Well, you know, who are you going to reach a ceasefire with? You're going to reach a ceasefire with Hamas. I mean, that is not entirely in Israel's gift to do that. It's going to stay in a state of war because Hamas continues to attack Israel. These list of demands are impossible. We know that this is going to happen. It's a foregone conclusion. We've had the Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons saying that he wants Parliament to be recalled. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I also don't think it will make any difference, Neil. I wonder what you think.
Well, one other thing, Peter. I mean, all the conditions are on Israel, but nothing on Hamas. Nothing to say if...
Well, in fairness, he reiterated there's no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Our demands on Hamas remain. They must release all the hostages, sign up to a ceasefire, accept that they will play no role in the government of Gaza, and disarm. So there are demands on Hamas.
But they're not going to reach that. So is he saying this, they're not going to agree to that, so we won't go ahead with the recognition?
Well, no.
No, exactly. Yeah. So it's not a condition on Hamas whatsoever. And by the way, we know that both parties do not recognise the existence of Israel. So why not a condition that you actually put it into your programme, Mr. Hamas, that you recognise Israel and the Palestinian Authority?
Those are all very wise.
Too one-sided for words. I hate that man, as the man said earlier, with every fibre. I thought I hated him this morning. I hate him even more now than Starmer. Honestly, I really, really do. I'm so despondent. I'm so angry. I can't even express myself. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, Neil, thank you for giving us a ring. And Neil's absolutely right. Don't just shout at the radio. Give us a ring. Let us know what you think about this. 0344 499 1000. You can shout at me if you like. Thank you to Richard. He says, if I was Israel, I would withdraw the ambassador from the UK and cease any sharing of intelligence with the UK, which Israel does at the moment. Graham also says, this really shows that David Lammy is no mastermind. I see what you did there, Graham. Graham in Bushy there, if you can. At some stage, not during this show, of course, but at some stage I urge you to go on YouTube and watch David Lammy on Celebrity Mastermind. It might give you a smile that many of us need today with this ridiculous and appalling news out of Downing Street. Stay with us.
Has a firmer grip on the state of London and the way Khan has trashed it than our Prime Minister does.
Yeah. He's a friend of mine. He is desperate. I'll tell you why Starmer is desperate. And I did, to my credit, say this during the election. Lots of other people did as well. But I remember saying every night, his tent is so wide. I remember when he got that Tory MP from Dover, Elphic's wife. She came and joined him. And I remember thinking, you've got Corbyn's lot, you've got her. Your tent is so big to get elected, mate. When you get elected, you're going to spend your entire time running around fighting fires.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who's been in touch, including someone who's texted me to say if the EU and the UK continue to go up against Israel like this, then we will end up turning America and Israel against us. Europe will be divided because quite a number of European countries won't be with the UK and France, so we will end up being isolated in more ways. We should be supporting Israel. It is the road to the destruction of democracy. Gillian in Warwickshire says, I'm absolutely appalled at Starmer and this dreadful Labour government and its disgraceful decision on recognising the Palestinian state. Rewarding terrorism and betraying Israel is not what the majority of British people want. What about saving the hostages? I'm so very angry. Thank you, Peter, for always being on the right side, says Gillian. Let's speak to Simon Johnson. He is former Chief Executive of the Jewish Leadership Council. Simon, you're very welcome to the programme this evening. Thank you for joining me. What do you make of the change in tack, the significant news from the Prime Minister that the country, the government anyway, of the United Kingdom will be recognising a Palestinian state from September?
I agree with much of what the previous callers to your show, Peter, have said. I believe that there should be a Palestinian state, but as part of a two-state solution negotiated and agreed to by all parties and with adequate security guarantees for both sides. But the problem with the British government's statement today that they will recognise a Palestinian state is they're seeming to do it as a means of punishing Israel. And they're saying that it's only Israel's responsibility to achieve a ceasefire. The wording is clear. It says Israel must agree to a ceasefire or we will announce a Palestinian state, which completely ignores the fact that there have been more than 10 ceasefire deals that have been rejected by Hamas. Mm-hmm. And so how can Israel be blamed for there not being a ceasefire or held responsible as the only party for there being a ceasefire? And as others have said, and I absolutely agree, this is a complete reward for the terrorist action taken by Hamas on October the 7th. It gives them no incentive, no obligation whatsoever to release their hostages, and simply says that, yes, we accept that you killed 1,200 innocent civilians on October the 7th, and you took 250 people hostage. But don't worry about that, because we, the British government, think that we're going to recognise a Palestinian state, which is one of your demands anyway, alongside the other of your demands, which is the complete annihilation of the State of Israel. So I'm afraid that all that this does is punishes Israel and rewards Hamas terrorism.
I wonder what you think it'll do here in the UK as well. We know that incidences of anti-Semitism are so much higher than they have been in recent years. It's gone up exponentially since the 7th of October. There are so many Jews here in the UK, some of whom have absolutely no interest in the politics of Israel, because guess what? It's a foreign country for which they're not responsible. What would you think they will do to anti-Semitism in this country when it says to those people who are on those marches, the pro-Palestinian marches every couple of weeks in London, actually, we're doing what you want us to do?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's saying to those people who are marching that we'll agree to all your demands. These marches now are moving from being marches in support of Palestinian people and people in Gaza into hate marches against Israel and anybody that supports Israel. And that's the problem that you now have. So I don't know what this is going to do to already high and worrying levels of anti-Semitism. But what I do know is it is further distancing the government of the United Kingdom from its ally, its friend and its security partner, the government and the State of Israel.
There is another aspect of this, and this is other countries as well. France, of course, has gone down this road. America hasn't. Do you think it's a coincidence that Keir Starmer has waited until today, not done this yesterday, when he was sitting beside President Trump?
Well, it strikes me that he wouldn't have dared do it in front of President Trump, because I think he would have torn a strip off him. You saw what President Trump said, and he made a number of uncomfortable comments for the Prime Minister. If he'd have done this, I think that Trump would have expressed his views very, very colourfully. I do not see what the hurry is for the British government in doing this. France did it, and I thought they were wrong when they made their announcement. I do not see what the government is achieving by doing this now, by not agreeing its policy with its major partner, the United States. And all I can think is that this is a piece of electoral activism that is signalling to a part of the electorate that they are not, as they are often accused to be, in the pocket of Israel. And what they've done here, in my view, is disgracefully shifted the whole balance of this debate over to Israel, and it said, it's over to you to achieve a ceasefire. And although they seem to have, as your previous caller said, told Hamas that they will need to agree to the release of the hostages, there's no incentive for them to do so, because the government will recognise the state of Palestine anyway. So as far as Hamas is concerned, they've achieved 50% of what they want to achieve.
Okay. We've got to go to the news, but Simon, thank you. That's Simon Johnson there, is former Chief Executive of the Jewish Leadership Council. Plenty more about this before the end of the programme at 7 o'clock. We'll debate it after the news as well. Stay with us here on Talk and let us know your thoughts too.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good evening to you. This is Talk. Thank you so much for your company. The big breaking news this afternoon is that Keir Starmer says that the United Kingdom is going to recognise a state of Palestine. That is going to happen in September. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the big row between Peter Cardwell, the Technology Secretary, and Nigel Farage. He said that Nigel Farage was on the side of Jimmy Savile in regard to the Online Safety Act. We'll talk to Sarah Pochin, who is the right-hand woman of Nigel Farage, in just a second. We'll talk about migration, that horrendous story in Rotherham, the allegations against 3 police officers who were allegedly abusers. Lots more to discuss, loads of calls coming in as well on the Palestinian situation and many other things as well. We'll hear what the Prime Minister had to say. We'll see what's in the Sun tomorrow. No doubt they will be discussing this as well, and we'll hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can send me a WhatsApp, you can send me a WhatsApp text message or a voice note, or indeed give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. Plenty to discuss between now and Kevin O'Sullivan at 7 o'clock. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been speaking in the last hour about this major breaking news we've heard as well from the Foreign Secretary David Lammy at the United Nations. Let's hear from the Prime Minister now about what he has said about recognising Palestine as a state.
I've always said that we will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
That's the Prime Minister speaking earlier today in Downing Street. He says that at the General Assembly, which will happen in September, I think it's the 9th of September, is the start of it. Huge global conference that happens every year in New York at the United Nations. That is when the UK will be formally recognising a state of Palestine. There in New York today was the Foreign Secretary David Lammy. This is what he said.
And so it is with the hand of history on our shoulders that His Majesty's government therefore intends to recognise the state of Palestine when the UN General Assembly gathers in September here in New York.
Sarah Pochin is the Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsbury. Sarah, good evening. What do you make of this major change in UK government policy?
Good evening, Peter, and thank you for having me on. I think this is quite frightening what's happening. The government is bulldozing through a policy here. This is not a democratic decision. This has not been debated in Parliament. And we know, of course, that even with a debate in Parliament, their majority is such that it probably would get voted through. But
do you think Parliament should be recalled, Sarah?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. This is incredibly serious. The fact is, Peter, that there are still hostages being held by Hamas, being tortured, being raped in all likelihood. We've heard some of the awful stories coming out from those that have been released. They've still got hostages. Just imagine if there were British hostages being held somewhere in the world and the British government wasn't doing all it could to get them back. There would be outrage in this nation. That's what Israel is doing. It still has its people hostage there. The fact is as well that Israel have led the world. They have been brave in facing up to these terrorists that is the Hamas situation, the organisation. Israel is attacked constantly on every border, on every side. And yet, here we are, we've got Egypt, the biggest land border with this area. And yet, what do? Do they take refugees in? No. Do they try and get aid in? No, not as far as I'm aware. And yet, so Israel is absolutely left to its own devices. Thank God the Americans back Israel every step of the way. But we know as well that when aid has been dropped in, it is seized by Hamas. We've heard stories about what Hamas try and do with that aid, whether they try and sell it, they keep it. Hamas are ruling this area. They are ruling the population. And for the UK government to say they are going to recognise the state of Palestine without a democratic debate in Parliament is frightening, it's shocking, and it just shows you how this government does not have democracy at its heart. It is running roughshod over democracy.
Why do you think they're doing it, Sarah? Do you think it's because of genuine concern about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, or do you think it's about perhaps problems closer to home in regard to many Labour MPs and others as well who are pressing Keir Starmer to do this? He is a weak Prime Minister, is he not?
He's a weak Prime Minister. I would be amazed if Keir Starmer lasts 4 years. The fact is that Keir Starmer, in my opinion, and it is my opinion, is doing this because of the Muslim vote that props up the Labour Party. We know that he has trouble in his ranks. He's under pressure from his ranks to declare this state of Palestine. But is that in the right interests of global peace? Is it in the right interests of the British people? And does it reflect the view of the British people? Well, without a debate in Parliament, then how can he be sure of that? He is elected to represent the British people on a global scale. Well, he's an embarrassment. And as for David Lammy and his speech, putting a hand of history, God help us, Peter, if that represents a hand of history.
Sarah, there's another big political riot. It involves your party and it involves your party leader, Nigel Farage. I just want to remind our viewers and listeners, or those who might have missed it, about the comments that Technology Secretary Peter Cardwell, Labour of the Labour government, of course, made to Sky News this morning.
We have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it, if people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'll be perpetrating his crimes online. And Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side.
Well, this afternoon, your leader, the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, hit back.
Well, this is so absolutely disgusting that it's almost beyond belief. Just how low can the Labour government sink in its desperation? Yes, of course, they're in trouble. They're well behind us in the opinion polls. But frankly, to say that I would do anything that would in any way aid and abet people like Jimmy Savile is frankly just, it's so below the belt, it's almost not true. But all of this is, of course, deflection. Deflection because we were told from the very start, and by the way, it's not the Labour government that have passed this legislation, it was the previous Conservative government that have passed this legislation, which is why you've barely heard a squeak out of them. But if it's designed to protect children, then I sense it may very, very well have been drawn up by people who don't know what they're doing.
Sarah, I'm going to presume that you agree with every word that Nigel Farage says there. What do you make of what Peter Cardwell has said?
I do agree with Nigel's position, and I made that very clear on an interview last night about the online safety bill. It's called an online safety bill. It does nothing to protect our children. What it does do is suppress free speech. With respect to Peter Cardwell, he should be absolutely ashamed of his behaviour. But do you know what, Peter? If this was in reverse, if this was something that Reform was saying, then I think that one of us would have been arrested by now, because doesn't this fall into the Labour view now of condemning free speech, of inciting hatred? Making comments like this about somebody as high profile as Nigel Farage is putting his safety at risk, in my opinion. It's potentially, opening the door to all those trolls, all those people
I think you're right with that, Sarah. I think you're right with that. I also think that what Labour told us was that they were the grown-ups. They weren't just going to throw mud. They were going to say things that were sensible, and they were going to have sensible debates with people. I mean, I wonder, I don't know if you're familiar with Godwin's law, Professor Godwin in the United States. He says once you start comparing people to the Nazis, you've lost the argument. I mean, once you go down the road of comparing people to monsters like Jimmy Savile, I think you've lost the argument.
I really think this is sinking so low because they are desperate. We know as reform politicians, all of us, that the next 4 years are going to be a bumpy ride. We have to stand firm. We have to hold the line, because what we're saying is right. This Online Safety Act is nothing of the sort. And mark our words, because I tell you what, Peter, I get concerned that you and I, it's online at the moment, but just say that, you know, my team clip these things, of course we do as politicians, and we add comments and we post them online. What's going to happen? Am I going to get arrested? Am I going to get thrown into jail? Am I going to be another Lucy Connolly because you and I have even had this conversation? That's where we're going.
I'll bake you a big file into a cake and send it in, Sarah, if you get sent to prison. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Listen, on a more serious note, let's talk about migration, and specifically, actually, before we get to that, let's talk about Rotherham. This breaking story this afternoon about 5 women who were exploited by grooming gangs in Rotherham as children, saying they were also abused by police officers in the town at the time. One says she was raped from the age of 12 by a serving South Yorkshire police officer in a marked police car. He would threaten to hand her back to the gang if she did not comply. This is just shocking, and also not shocking at the same time, because it's just so appalling in regard to Rotherham.
Well, this is obviously allegations. My understanding is at the moment, and there's an investigation underway. But the point is, the investigation is being done by South Yorkshire Police. So South Yorkshire Police are investigating South Yorkshire Police. How does that work? And in fact, Professor Alexis Jay, I think herself, the author of the latest Grooming Gangs report, has herself said how shocked she is about that mere fact. How can that possibly be allowed? And how can the public have any confidence that the results of that investigation are actually going to reflect what really happened? There are allegations now that these girls used to let the police abuse them, rape them in their cars, wherever, because the police would threaten them. If not, they'd be returned to the grooming gangs and they'd be raped by 15 to 20 men at a time. Now, those are allegations, but they are so serious at a time when public trust in the police, I would say, is at an all-time low.
And crime is so high as well, Sarah. We've seen with that stabbing in Southwark in London yesterday, 2 people dying there as well. We just know that crime is out of control in this country.
Crime is out of control. That stabbing was horrendous. I'm surprised there's not been more coverage on the news. It wasn't on the national news last night. So 2 people dead, 1 fighting for their life in hospital, and the actual perpetrator who has been arrested but is also in hospital. This is happening.
The alleged perpetrator, we should say. Yeah.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. You're absolutely quite right. The alleged perpetrator. This is happening on our streets. It wasn't on the national news last night. It was GB News actually that I think broke the story last night. And unfortunately, you have to beg the question. They have said, the authorities have said, that the alleged perpetrator is either a foreign national or of mixed race. You have to beg the question whether people are not reporting it now, because are we already being censored on what the national broadcasters are allowed to say?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that is correct, and I remember a few days after that horrendous attack in Liverpool, and of course we'll be careful about that because there are charges outstanding with that. But what happened in Liverpool the day of the celebrations of Liverpool Football Club winning the Premier League, we were told immediately that was a white British man. We were told within an hour that was a white British man.
Two-tier justice. Two-tier justice, Peter.
Something not entirely dissimilar on a much smaller scale. Something happened in Leicester on the Saturday. I was on air on the Saturday when a car, there was a driver of the car, careered into people in Leicester. Now, we asked Leicestershire Police, they put out the information and said a 31-year-old man has been arrested. And look, it didn't matter to me what ethnicity he was, but they didn't tell us what ethnicity he was. It later transpired he's a Sikh who was born in the UK. Charges in that as well, so we'll be careful. But my question was, surely this has to be a universal policy. Whatever background people are from, whatever ethnicity they have, there has to be a very clear and equal sense of what the police actually tell us, because that's the only way, I think anyway, Sarah, and I'd be interested in your view, that we're going to have any trust in the police, because always we're going to be asking, what are they hiding from us?
The police should be impartial, full stop. You know, there is, who could possibly argue against that? And yet we know at the moment that that's not happening. Now, who are giving the police the orders? you have to ask, where are they coming from? Is it coming from the government? Is it coming from the high command in the police? I don't know the answer to that. But the fact is, at the moment, the police are not impartial, and that is why the British people are losing the confidence in the police. They're losing confidence that this country has law and order under control, because it clearly doesn't. And as you know, Reform have started a campaign over the summer and have called it Britain is Lawless. We've been criticised for that. Some people will claim that crime is on a decrease. Crime is not on a decrease. I saw an interview the other night with Times Radio claiming that crime was on a decrease, and they had some graph, with everything going down. It's absolute nonsense. Crime is not being reported. It's not being reported because people have no confidence that the police will come out. We know that crime look in London, look at the knife crime going on. I mean, you can't go out wearing a fancy watch without risking your life in London at the moment. To name just but one example, people do not feel at all that the police are on their side at the moment. And something like this Rotherham situation is going to do nothing to help that.
Sarah, thank you. That's Sarah Pochin there, who is the Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. The Israeli Foreign Ministry has tweeted that it rejects the statement by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The shift in the British government's position at the time, says the Israel Foreign Ministry, following the French move and internal political pressures, constitutes a reward for Hamas and harms efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza and a framework for the release of the hostages. That is the Israeli official response to what Keir Starmer has said, rejecting the statement, saying the shift in the British government's position following the French move and internal political pressures constitutes a reward for Hamas and harms efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza and a framework for the release of the hostages. We're going to continue to talk about this story. Rock in Worcestershire. Is your name Rock?
Yeah, hi, Rock, yeah.
Ah, okay, great. Tell us what you think about this then, Rock.
Well, if I wasn't already incandescently angry with Starmer, this has just tipped me over the edge. I mean, what he's done in our name is saying, by recognising Palestine as a state, which has many caveats to it, you can't just recognise any part of anything with the state. But he's also threatened Israel with a ultimatum that if you don't do this by such and such, then we would do this. That is absolutely shocking, and Hamas must be laughing their boots off. This is exactly what...
Playing into their hands.
Exactly. I can't believe the incompetence of this man. Who the hell does he think he is? It's shocking, absolutely shocking.
I think a lot of people feel the same way. Thank you very much for your call there. That's Rock in Worcestershire. And thank you to David Hull, who says, I'm disgusted with the Prime Minister's stance on Palestine. The government may recognise the state of Palestine, but the citizens of the UK won't. The only state this cowardly government needs to recognise is the state our country is now in, says Dave. Tanya says, can the government just decide to recognise a Palestinian state, or does it have to be voted on? It doesn't. They can do what they want. I don't understand how some things can be decided without a democratic vote. Well, Tanya, I think there probably will be some sort of vote on this in September when Parliament comes back. It's not back for 5-6 weeks, and of course Labour has such a huge majority, and there are other people as well who will vote for it, not just like Jeremy Corbyn, of course, who's an independent MP. He set up a new political party, as yet unnamed, with Zara Sultana. He says, he's just released a statement and says, Palestinian statehood is not a bargaining chip. It is not a threat. It is an inalienable right of the Palestinian people. Our demands on the shameful government remain the same. End all arms sales to Israel, impose widespread sanctions and stop the genocide now. Factually not a genocide, but since when has Jeremy Corbyn really cared about facts? Lots more to discuss in this. We'll also properly discuss the allegations that police officers abused Rotherham victims. We'll talk about that in just a second. Stay with us.
has a firmer grip on the state of London and the way Khan has trashed it than our Prime Minister does.
So you see, he's a friend of mine. He is desperate. I'll tell you why Starmer is desperate. And I did, to my credit, say this during the election. Lots of other people did as well. But I remember saying every night, his tent is so wide. I remember when he got that Tory MP from Dover, Elphic's wife. She came and joined him. And I remember thinking, you've got Corbyn's lot, you've got her. Your tent is so big to get elected, mate. When you get elected, you're going to spend your entire time running around fighting fires.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots more coming in on the announcement by Keir Starmer that he is to recognise a Palestinian state. We'll come back to that story a little bit later on in the programme, but just a couple of messages. Heather says, I'm with Israel and America. 1,000,000,000% Israel and America are my allies. Sharon says, what two-state solution? This is nothing but a fantasy. He is not living in any kind of reality. And Dawn in Chelmsford says, hi Peter, of course Starmer wants to secure the Muslim vote. He knows that Corbyn's new party will take votes. He is under extreme pressure from his own left to recognise Palestine. He bends with the wind. Israel will probably ignore him, says Dawn in Chelmsford. Loads more coming on this. Stay with us here on Talk, but for the meantime, I want to not be distracted by this, because there's another big story that we should be talking about today. Mike Neville's with us, former Metropolitan Police detective. 5 women who were exploited by grooming gangs in Rotherham. As children say, they were also abused by police officers in the town at the time. One alleges she was raped from the age of 12 by a serving South Yorkshire police officer in a marked police car. He would threaten to hand her back to the gang if she did not comply. Mike, horrendous detail coming out here. The people who were supposed to protect those girls allegedly doing quite the opposite of that, actually perpetrating these crimes. How does the police in any way begin to investigate themselves over this? Surely external police forces need to be brought in to take a good look at South Yorkshire Police.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Peter. It's an absolute disgrace. We've had the work. We thought it was bad enough when police officers were not investigating these things, when alleged community leaders could stop things, and we were told that not investigating grooming gangs was some kind of social cohesion. And now it's stepped into even more worse ground, that 3 officers have been arrested, retired officers. And I agree with you, and I agree with Professor Jay, who did the report into Rotherham in 2014. There is no way on earth that South Yorkshire Police should be investigating this. You know, the South Yorkshire Police say, oh, none of the officers on the operation now were connected to these retired officers. But that simply isn't good enough for the victims. The victims have to have absolute trust. Now, I had a small part helping the Hillsborough inquiry. The Hillsborough inquiry involved, it was against South Yorkshire Police, and 4 separate police forces helped to investigate that, not South Yorkshire Police. And I think it's time to bring in a separate police force, or the National Crime Agency. There has to be, or they recruit retired officers, people who are completely independent of that police force. It cannot be allowed that South Yorkshire Police continue to investigate this. It's gone too far, in my view.
In terms of what these young women now are alleging, it is just absolutely horrendous. In a world where you were being abused so much, being raped once by a police officer was a lot easier than multiple rapes by the gang, and I think he knew that, this alleged victim has told the BBC. Written accounts, testimony from 25 other victims. I mean, there were at least 1,400 girls in Rotherham who were abused and raped by gangs of men, identified as victims being of mainly Pakistani heritage between 1997 and 2013. The J report, of course, concluded in 2014. The problem is this is still ongoing, isn't it? And even though a national inquiry has now reluctantly been agreed to by Keir Starmer, it is still going on today, and there will be corrupt people who were meant to protect these girls who are not protecting them. And that's what worries me, not just the historical aspect of it, how that was allowed to happen, but the fact that it's still happening now, Mike.
It's truly horrendous. Sometimes, Peter, I hold my head in my hands. I was really proud to be a police officer, in particular a Scotland Yard detective. And every time these things happen, I just think, what in God's name do people think of British policing? I mean, British policing used to be the envy of the world, and now we have this. And what we have is a political class who really don't want this to be. We saw with the Labour Party a 3-line whip to vote against an inquiry into this, and we just need the absolute. We need to know what's happening, and we need to be assured, as the public, that this is being targeted now, that we can have no more of these cover-ups because people get accused of Islamophobia or whatever else to try and smokescreen these wicked and evil crimes which ruin lives.
Speaking of crimes which ruin lives, 2 men have been killed, 2 others in hospital after a stabbing at a business in Bermondsey in South London. We know that Met officers were called to a commercial address at about 1 o'clock on Monday. A man aged 58 died in the scene, another died later in hospital. A third man detained in connection with the incident in hospital in a life-threatening condition. A fourth man also in his 30s in hospital. Very little reporting about this, and the fact that I just wonder why you think that is, and why you think that these kind of crimes are being neglected. Maybe because they're all too common these days and it doesn't feel like news to some people, even though there are of course devastating consequences for all those people and indeed their families.
Absolutely agree. It's become almost commonplace, hasn't it, these mass stabbings? And I think what really gets me, Peter, is that stabbings and knives, there used to be something of the night about them, didn't they? Jack the Ripper, Foggy Night. This is 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon in a place where people are just going to work. Now, when I read into the incident, it was said that it was an isolated incident and these people were known to each other. So whether it was we can speculate, maybe it was a work dispute, but where does a work dispute end up in 2 people dead and 2 other people being brutally stabbed? But I think what this does is the fact that there's not much reporting on it, and there was a similar incident about 6 months ago in Croydon where a man stabbed 3 people in a factory there, that, as you've said, it's just too commonplace. It's almost like you've got to stab 10 or 12 people to get in the news.
Yes.
And everything. And tomorrow it'll all be forgotten. There'll be another thing going on, another thing. And I just think all it does, though, is fuel people's fear. Not only are they not safe on the street, they can't have a phone or wear anything on the street. They might be stolen, they might be attacked, they might be raped. Not only are you not safe in your home where people are burgling and hardly any of those are solved, now you're not even safe where you go to work. So I think it just adds to this feeling of the society or the state has lost control of the country.
Yeah. Mike, thank you very much. That's Mike Neville there, former Met detective. Appreciate his contribution to the programme. Lots of people getting in touch in regard to the Middle East as well. Neil says, Cardi P, is it me, or has there been less debate in the Commons around major policies, whether it be the Chagos Islands or Palestine? There's been zero discussion in Parliament. If we go back to the last Parliament, it seemed that you couldn't pass wind without a 2-hour debate. Am I wrong? Neil, you're not wrong. There has been some debate on Chagos, but not nearly enough. Trevor says, good afternoon, Peter. You only have to look at how the public vote for Israel during the Eurovision to know where the British people, not our treacherous government, stand. It's a sad and embarrassing day for Britain. Will this be our century of shame, says Trevor. I'll tell you a secret, Trevor. I didn't even listen or watch to the Eurovision song contest. I'd heard the Israeli song. I thought it was really good, but I would have voted for Israel anyway, and they did a really good job with that, and they deserve to win. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, has a statement on Palestinian recognition. She says, when the country is looking for answers on asylum hotels, the cost of living is getting worse, and doctors are threatening to go on strike again, further endangering lives. It's disgraceful that Keir Starmer recalled his cabinet to try and sort out a political problem for the Labour Party. Recognising a Palestinian state won't bring the hostages home, won't end the war, and won't get aid into Gaza. This is political posturing at its very worst. I'm sure all of this will be covered in The Sun tomorrow. We'll take a look at what is coming up in the paper with one of its senior executives, actually, the night news editor, John Lucas, will be with us in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, lots to discuss in regard to what's in the Sun tomorrow. No doubt they will be covering the recognition of Palestine as a state, but a number of other stories as well are in the paper. John Lucas is with us, the night news editor of the Sun. John, great to have you in the studio. Tell us about this very sad story about a lion lured away from the sanctuary of his game reserve, shot dead by a bloodthirsty trophy hunter.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you're right, obviously we're going to be covering all the big politics issues of the day, but this is something a bit different from our man in Africa, Jamie Pyatt, with one of our top guys, Paul Sims, doing the rest of the investigation over here. You may remember about 10 years ago there was this big story about Cecil the lion.
I remember, yes.
Being shot. His
brother was also shot.
Yeah, that's right, and it brought this whole issue of big game hunting into focus. Lots of new rules and regulations were brought in. We've been looking at this, and actually we've found this lion is a 5-year-old head of a pride. I think he had about 6 cubs, called Blondie, and this has come to light because he'd just been fitted with a tracking collar by Oxford University, who were tracking him. 10 cubs it was, 10 cubs and 3 adult females as in this pride. And he should have been living on a national park in Zimbabwe. And what's happened is these people who arrange these hunts, they make these big game targets quite famous on social media. And so Blondie became a famous lion amongst people interested in this sort of thing. And they're able to charge about £35,000 for someone who wants to come and shoot this animal. But what they do that's illegal is they lure it over the boundary of the national park with meat, exactly the same as what happened with Cecil the lion. So they've done this, and you know, it's very sad, but you'll see the pictures in the Sun tomorrow of this big game hunter having killed the lion. And you know, I think it's going to cause a lot of anger because it shouldn't be happening anymore.
It's absolutely grim. You just leave them in the natural habitat. These are endangered animals. You know, just let them. Yeah. You know, it's awful. It's a horrible story, and I'm going to read that tomorrow, and I'm sure many people will be very, very angered by it. I think people will also be angered by the Yemeni migrant you're writing about tomorrow. Tell us about this.
Yeah, look, another day, another boat migrant who's ended up in a courtroom. We're keeping very close watch on all of these. In fact, we were at another case today, a Crown Court case that at the moment, we're not going to be able to talk about, but it's going to make people's jaws hit the floor when all the details of this come out. But this one that we're publishing tomorrow is about a Yemeni chap, Osama al-Hadid. He's 26. He hasn't been here very long. He came in January 2024. When he came in, he actually came in through Heathrow. But on his phone was found these horrific child abuse images, including other images of man having intercourse with a goat, if you could believe. And
this was on his phone?
This is all on his phone. Immigration officials searched his phone, found all this stuff. He was claiming asylum because he said the Houthis wanted to recruit him and force him into their army. And he's got an asylum case going on at the moment on this basis. So at the moment he can't be kicked out. But even worse than that, he's gone to Isleworth Crown Court today, where he's been given a suspended sentence. And when he walks out of court, he gave a thumbs up to reporters. And,
so he's got a suspended sentence despite the fact that he's got these horrendous videos on his phone, and he's saying he can't be deported because he might be forced to fight for the Houthis.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's sort of.
And Lucy Connolly's still in jail.
Exactly, and you know, we've covered for months and months, the whole of the British press, not just us, has been covering these a lot of these crazy immigration rulings. So you've got that in the mix, along with the criminal offences that we keep uncovering every day.
Tell us something else that is bats, but in a very different way. Birmingham Airport considering changing its name to Ozzy Osbourne Airport.
Yeah, and it's a real thing. So obviously, very sadly, Ozzy left us last week. Brought a lot of joy to the world, and particularly to that part of the country, Birmingham. And look, we've had it before. We've got John Lennon Airport in Liverpool. We've got George Best Airport.
Flown in and out of it many times.
In Belfast.
Robin Hood Airport in Nottingham, who may or may not have existed.
There you go. So this chap, a chap called Dan Hudson, massive Aussie fan, started a petition up to rename Birmingham Airport after Ozzy Osbourne. Very quickly got up to 50,000 signatures. We've been to Birmingham Airport today, and they are not ruling it out. They want to create a sculpture there, and they want to create a sort of art gallery part of the airport honouring Ozzy. And it is feasible. I mean, obviously Ozzy Osbourne is a very interesting name for an airport if you're flying into Ozzy Osbourne Airport, but obviously real name John Michael Osborne. It has got an airport sort of ring to it, the John Osborne International. Birmingham, it could happen. We're also tomorrow, a lot of our Ozzy Osbourne coverage is going to be around the funeral. So he's going to have a procession through Birmingham, and it's going to be a start. The actual funeral itself will be quite star-studded. I think we've got some names. Elton John's going to be there, and obviously all the family. I think a lot of it's under embargo, so I can't say too much, but we'll be covering that online tomorrow on video, and obviously everything else will be in the paper.
Yeah, of course. Also, speaking of airports, I love this story. Siblings turning up at the airport for their holiday. Slight issue.
Yeah, be warned. So it's holiday time. A lot of us have got things booked. I'm going away on Monday.
Okay.
And but I had to check because
of this story.
Because this couple, so this is Raphael and his sister Maggie. They're 28 and 30, full-grown adults, but we all do it. They turned up at London Gatwick Airport at the back end of June, hoping to fly to Barcelona. They got all the way, they got there and they found out, actually, they booked the flights for the following year, 2026.
So a year early.
So, absolute disaster for them. It's cost them an absolute fortune. They had to hastily rearrange a big cost. They hadn't really kind of seen each other for a while, so it's a big letdown for them. But
I booked flights for the wrong time before. I fly quite a lot, live in Northern Ireland, and go back fairly frequently. And I've definitely booked flights at the wrong time. I remember I turned up for a dinner that someone had put on for me. Actually, it was sort of three of us, and I turned up exactly a week early. For something once, but I knew where the place was anyway by the next week. Have you ever had anything like that where you've turned up early or late perhaps?
The worst thing that can happen is when you've got that day booked off at work and you forget about it.
Yes, and you turn up for work. You've done that.
You turn up for work. I've done that. Yeah.
Okay.
Very sheepishly, you sit down at your desk and and then try and justify leaving.
It never happened to me, but I was an early news reader for U105, which is of course still part of this group, and in Belfast, and it never actually happened to me, but I do know people who turned up at 6:45 to read the 6 o'clock news in the morning, and then were told, actually, sorry, it's not, you're a bit early. There was one. I was meant to get up at 7:30 one morning and go to work. I was staying at a friend's house and I set the alarm on my phone. And you know the way the keypad is? I'd done 4:30 rather than 7:30. I'd pressed in 4:30 rather than 7:30. So it was 3 hours before I had to go to the railway station for that. I wonder if viewers and listeners might have other thoughts on that being too early for something. 0344 499 1000. John, thanks for joining us as always. John Lucas there. I hope you have a lovely holiday next week as well. I look forward to that. John Lucas is the night news editor of The Sun. Loads of calls coming in, mainly on the Palestinian issue, and Peter Kyle as well. We will take your calls right up to 7 o'clock here on Talk Drive. Stay with us.
But as Donald Trump says, the sort of the key to being successful when you're in office is addressing those key concerns that the public have, and they are at the moment. They are immigration, they are the cost of living crisis and the economy, and dealing with the NHS. Now, there's a lot on the Prime Minister's plate, but they're the 2 or 3 things that the Prime Minister really has to get on top of.
Well, he really does, and he seems once again to be burying his head in the sand.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots of people reacting to the breaking news this afternoon that the UK will recognise a state of Palestine. Sandy has been in touch and said, I've just come in and heard this. Well, Peter, Starmer should know the majority of people in the UK did not vote for a Labour government. So no, the majority of the UK people will not recognise a state of Palestine. He does not speak for us. He speaks for the few vocal MPs in his party who are afraid for their jobs. And who on earth does Starmer think he is giving Israel conditions? I couldn't hate him more. Stephen Crowther says on Twitter, this is absolutely disgusting behaviour by the corrupt British government. Yet again, another decision based entirely on votes from the Muslim community. Disgusting. Natalia says, disgusted is the nicest word I can think of, to be honest. Am I surprised though? Nah. Not really. Let's remind ourselves what Keir Starmer said earlier on this afternoon.
I've always said that we will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution.
The Prime Minister speaking earlier on this afternoon, and the Foreign Secretary a few minutes later spoke to the United Nations, I should say, in New York. This is what the Foreign Secretary David Lammy had to say.
And so it is with the hand of history on our shoulders that His Majesty's government therefore intends to recognise the State of Palestine when the UN General Assembly gathers in September here in New York.
Lots of people getting in touch about this. Christina says, recognising Palestine will not be supported by the majority of the British people. This is sickening. Pete in Lincolnshire says, it is outrageous. The majority of British know that the pictures from Gaza are nothing more than Hamas propaganda. Starmer is pandering to the Muslim voters. Barry says, I'm sure the majority of British people are thoroughly delighted. We will follow France's lead come September. In the meantime, ... Barry says. Earl says, on the 1-year anniversary of the Southport attack, children attacked by a terrorist and fearless leader decides to mark that date by calling a piece of land run by terrorists as a state. Rob in Dublin says, well, that's actually about something different. I'll come back to that. Stephen Millings in Belfast says, the UK recognising as Palestinian state, how many bungling errors can one UK Prime Minister make? It is just shameful. I want to speak to Katie, who is in Watford. Katie, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Thank you so much for letting me speak. I think the first thing to remember is that the Palestinians have been offered a state many, many times over the last 80 years as part of a peace process, and they have consistently rejected that, just like Hamas has rejected another ceasefire offer. And the majority, unfortunately, of Palestinians, including their leadership, don't want a two-state, hence why they shout out, including on the streets of London, we don't want no two states, we want 1948 or the river to the sea, which means the eradication of Israel. They want a one-state solution where no Jews were allowed to live. But the main point is, who would run this new state? You have two options, Hamas, which are a prescribed terrorist organisation, and then you have the Palestinian Authority led by Fatah, which are 20 years into their last election, and who pay terrorists and their families every time they murder Jews. These are not proper partners for peace. And then the third option is, of course, for Israel, just give up the land like they did in Gaza in 2005. And look what happened. They said, here you go, make your own state. We've left you loads of infrastructure. You know, Gaza is beautiful. It has beaches. It could have been made, you know, the Singapore of the Middle East. Unfortunately, Hamas took over and turned it into a terrorist hellhole for their own people. And I think, you know, whilst a two-state solution might one day be, something that we can aspire to, it has to be part of the peace process. Both the Palestinians and Israelis deserve to feel secure and safe in their own land. And you can't make peace right now. Who are you going to make peace with? As I say, Hamas are a terrorist organisation. Palestinian Authority don't want peace. I mean, Bill Clinton famously said that the offer that was given, latterly to Arafat was the best solution ever, and they rejected it. So I think it's just empty words. I mean, especially from David Lammy. He talks this great game about Israel has to, capitulate, and yet he's holding hands and shaking hands with, the regime in Syria, who just murdered 2,000 Druze and Christians, and the world is silent. I think if there is going to be a two-state solution, it has to be part of a systematic peace process with genuine partners for peace.
Katie,
and I don't see who that can be at the moment.
Katie, I cannot disagree with a single word that you've said. You've put it brilliantly. You're my call of the day. Thank you very much indeed. That's Katie in Watford there. Marshall's in Leeds and has given me a ring on 03444991000. Marshall, what do you make of this?
To say I'm disillusioned as a British Jew is probably the understatement of the day. I feel let down. I feel gutted. I would love to be a fly on the wall when people within the Jewish community welcome in the Sabbath on Friday night and ask themselves around the table, do we have a future in the United Kingdom? Because I just don't see it. I don't see how you can reward terrorism, how you can bow down to the pressure of people calling on the streets, as Katie has quite rightly said, for the eradication of the State of Israel, supporting a group who still advocate the death of Jews globally. They haven't changed, that Hamas. I was on, we do advocating in Leeds, and I was on the streets today, and a lady said to me, I don't have a problem with Jews, but I have a problem with Zionists. Well, that's just the most ridiculous comment when you take into consideration that 90% of Jews are Zionists because they believe in the State of Israel. And I asked her, I said, do you believe that Jews have the right to self-determination? And she said, yes. I said, well, there you are. You're only saying what we're saying.
Well, also, I mean, that's a perfect illustration, Marshall, of how so few people actually realise what Zionism actually is. I'm a Zionist. Do you believe that Israel has a right to... Do you believe that Jews have a right to self-determination? Do you believe that Israel has a right to exist? Yes, of course I do. It's a perfectly 100%. Logical, reasonable position.
100%.
It doesn't mean you think, Benjamin Netanyahu is a brilliant person and a wonderful leader who never does anything wrong. Of course it doesn't. It's the principle.
If you were to ask me, do I back everything that the Israeli army have done, the Israeli government that have done, then war is difficult. Things happen.
Of course it is, but
look at previous. Every time there's been a war, things have gone wrong, but people are blaming the wrong people. We can see the trucks of food that have been stuck in Gaza, that the UN are refusing to put out, and I blame. And I've said this to you before, Peter. I put significant blame or responsibility on the BBC and on Sky News because they have fed the population of the UK with nothing but lies and rhetoric that just has built this wave of hatred of Jews and anti-Semitism, and it's a bad time to be Jew. I can only speak for myself. I've never felt like this as a British Jew.
Well, I know many Jews who feel exactly the same way, Marshall, and I'm thinking about you today because I don't think it's a good thing for you, and I really do think that a number of people in those marches will be incredibly happy that this has happened because that's what they've been calling for as well. James has been in touch and says, Trump told Starmer Macron recognising Palestine didn't matter as this is pointless. What is this government doing to the UK? Julian Bromley says, did he mention this to President Trump yesterday? Dan and Kent says, another new low for this government in recognising Palestine as a state. Starmer waited for the Parliament summer break and for Trump to return to the United States before announcing this. How many Gaza refugees will now arrive on our shores? Paul in Weymouth. This is so wrong on every level. It's student politics of the worst kind. Listening to your idiot Foreign Secretary making that speech at the UN made me physically sick. I'm 65 and proudly served my country in the Royal Navy for 20 years. I'm ashamed of how low we have sunk. I simply can't believe how fast Britain has lost its values, its standards, its soul. I don't recognise this once wonderful country, says Paul in Weymouth. Well, Paul, thank you for your service to our country. It's such a shame you feel that way, but I can totally see why you have. The decision, one person says, will give the terrorists a belief that we are even more empowered and we will see more terrorism across Europe against soft targets. Katie says, I'm fuming. I'm debating emailing my MP, but she's a Conservative, so I'm not sure what that would do. Katie, do email your MP. Let them know what you think. Put the pressure on. Make your voice heard. Leslie says, I've emailed the Speaker's office to demand Parliament will be recalled immediately for the debate on the Palestine decision. Beck says, Margaret currently in Tunisia here, this surely shows how much Starmer hates the UK. He'd rather support a terrorist organisation than support the British citizens. He, Lamy, etc. are traitors to our country, and the sooner we get them out, the better. This is not only an insult to the majority of us, but a bigger insult and total disregard of British Jews. Disgraceful. Simon says, what is Starmer's endgame here? If he recognises a Palestinian state and Israel doesn't have a ceasefire, is he going to send British troops to defend Palestine? Well, let's hope not. Laurie says, I'm 78 and a proud Jew, but I've never been so upset, and I'm now a bit worried about the future of Jewish people in this country. Marshall thinks the same thing. Thank you to Robbie, who says, I could really feel the pain and the determination in Norman Wallace's voice as well. And he's right, that monstrous name in Southport should never be mentioned again until the day it's reported he's finally getting the ultimate judgment when he's gone. That is Rob in Dublin. Luke in Worcester says, when will they learn Angela Rayner, Lucy Powell, Diane Abbott, Keir Starmer, David Lammy, all reaching for the smears, smearing others, it always backfires. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and expecting a difficult result. A bunch of morons, says Luke in Worcester, talking, of course, about that row between Peter Kyle and, indeed, Keir Starmer. Leo says, may I say how impressed I am at the way in which Mr Farage has dealt with that disgusting and vile outburst by that stupid Labour MP. Nigel, with his stately and dignified composure, has once again showed why he deserves to be in number 10 and our next Prime Minister. And Mark in Norfolk says, regarding to this like Savile tactic, it's a clear sign of the type of spineless alarm that is radiating from Labour right now. I expect this to continue until the next election, says Mark in Norfolk. Loads of people getting in touch with us, ringing us, texting us. I'm really sorry we can't get to all of you, but if you want to make your voice heard, ring Kevin O'Sullivan. He's coming up after the news. Kevin is here. How are you doing?
I'm very good, Peter. The Online Safety Act, just to protect children from the dangers, the horrors of the internet, right? It was also used at the weekend to block people from watching footage of the asylum seeker protest in Leeds.
Oh, right, okay.
Which was pretty handy for the Labour government, wasn't it?
And indeed, Katie Lamb, a Conservative MP, who was making a speech about Rotherham and the rape gangs. That apparently we weren't allowed to see that because of the Online Safety Act.
Yeah, exactly right. So, yes, hopefully it does protect children, but it protects the rest of us as well from our right to free speech. That's why we're against this bill. Nigel Farage is right. It needs a lot of amendments. It's not right. It's wrong. It's killing freedom of expression. And Labour love that. They hate free speech, don't they, those socialists?